I had meant to be babysitting, but again, I got cancelled on, so I was home earlier than what I said I was originally going to be. Pulling away confused, though, I asked her what was wrong. Turns out, my mum had been trying to get a hold of me, but my phone had died. I had went to babysit and nobody was home, so I just decided to head back on the bus, but wasn't able to let my mum know. She sits me down, though, and starts trying to ask me questions about the dad and my time babysitting. Confused, I had mentioned that I had only met him once and only really spoke to him on the phone, a handful of times if that, when the kids were acting up. Nodding, my mum started pressing on and asked if anything else had happened and kept questioning me, saying I could tell her anything. I just looked at her confused and told her that nothing had happened and asked what this was all about. I always remember her taking a deep breath at this point and saying, "Oh, thank God," before letting me know what happened. Now, as I said, the details are vague because this was on the news, but it turns out the guy had killed someone while working and been taken in by the police. During interrogation, it turns out that he admitted to beating his wife, and there were speculations of assaults. There was also mention that one of his types were petite girls that had dark hair, pale, which happened to match my description at the time, and my mum was obviously terrified in case something bad had happened to me. I'm turning 23 this year, and it still gives me the shivers when I think about it. I remember feeling like I was just going to throw up, and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach for days. My mum held me close, crying because she had worried sick all day and scared in case something bad had happened to me. Needless to say, I stopped babysitting for the family right there and then. I had felt so awful for the wife, though, as she was honestly one of the nicest women that I had ever met. About a week later, I got a text from her. As it turns out, I had left some books, so I had said that I would go get them after phone. And when I saw her, my heart just sank. She had obviously not slept and was putting on a brave face for the kids who weren't sure what was going on. We ended up sitting in the kitchen and I gave her a hug, just trying to comfort her. I had mentioned that if she needed help with the kids, since it was gone now, I would try and help, but she immediately refuses as, it turned out, people had started attacking the house. She gave me my stuff, paid for the wages with a little more added. I completely forgot, and said that she appreciated it, but it would be better off if I just took a step back from the family, as she didn't want me getting hurt for being associated with them. To this day, I still think about them, and it still scares me after thinking about what could have happened. I still talk to the younger kids, who are a lot older now, and even help tutor her younger girl. I helped the oldest when he started high school because I noticed the kids bullying him for what his dad had done, which was awful, considering that it wasn't the fault of the entire family. So I had just gotten back from the beach and I went inside the house looking for my grandmother. The door was unlocked and she never leaves without locking the door. I didn't see her on the couch and her bedroom door was not closed, so I knew she wasn't taking a nap, but like I said, it was odd that she wasn't on the couch or the front porch. I glanced at the table and there was no note. I called for her and I heard a kind of muffled noise. I thought it was a muffled call for help at first, so I ran into the back. I didn't see her on the bed, so I ran to the bathroom and she wasn't there either. I called again for her and didn't hear anything, so I looked around the bathroom once more and then back to the bedroom, and I swear that I saw her laying on the floor in the bedroom. I saw her long enough and well enough to see what she was wearing, a blue sweater and jeans. I blinked though, and when I did, she just wasn't there, and for a moment I thought I just imagined it, so I ran to the front of the house and looked around, and maybe to get my mum or something. This time though, I saw my grandmum's neon yellow notepad on the kitchen table. It was so bright that it was impossible not to see, and there was a note saying that she went across the street for a second. I felt so disorientated and confused for a second. I went back outside and there was my grandmother with the neighbor, and she was wearing a completely different outfit too. I didn't tell anyone because, well, I didn't want to freak anyone out, Plus, I don't know if anyone will believe me anyway. But I just kind of hope that whoever that other person was, I hope they get help. Some years ago, me and my friends went for a drive in an unused quarry, and now national park here in the UK, and we spent a fair amount of time there throughout our teenage years too. Being the teenagers that we were, we would find ways of entertaining ourselves, sometimes at the expense of others. Nothing too sinister, but being your usual kids that had nothing more to do. One of our favourite pastimes would be to turn off our headlights and park up discreetly so no other cars could see us. A lot of people would park up there and smoke weed and whatnot, out of sight of the police. We would hide in the car in the dark, and once we saw someone pull up to have a quiet smoke, we'd pretend to be the police, i.e. flash a blue light and play a siren as loud as possible on our sub. We found it funny, okay, but I get it, not all that good. But obviously this would result in the people in the car panicking and trying to hide their weed to drive off as fast as possible. Funnily enough, too, we ended up making several friends from doing this once they realized that it was just a joke. Over the years, though, pretty much every night that we were up there, we could see a motorhome parked up in the same spot. We never paid them any mind because you could never see inside it, and it always seemed dormant and dark anyway. The motorhome was clearly a very dated model and was pretty dirty. The only thing other than it looking slightly out of place, though, was that it had the biggest antenna on top that I'd ever seen. Now, one night, it was extremely quiet up in the quarry, and we were about to go home because there wasn't really anything to do. Or should I say, no one to terrorize. One of our friends asked why we hadn't given any grief to the people in the motorhome. We explained what I said before, and it just never seemed like there was anyone home anyway. After some time, though, we decided that we'd bang on the doors and try to shake the vehicle and scream "earthquake." Again, please bear in mind that we were really bored, stupid teenagers. All four of us got out of the car as quietly as we could and sneaked all around the dirty motorhome. We counted to 3, tried to hide our giggles, and began our plan. We shook and banged and shouted "earthquake" at the top of our lungs, and after about 30 seconds, there was no response. We all looked at one another because there was clearly no one home and it felt completely anticlimactic. We began to walk back to the car, which wasn't too much of a distance away, when the motorhome door opened at a pretty relaxed pace. We all heard the creak of the door and spun around to see who it was, and we all stood frozen at what we were seeing. People began to pile out of the motorhome, not quickly and not slowly, but like nothing had happened. Now, that was strange enough, but the part that made our blood turn cold was the fact that they were all wearing masks, black masks. But they were covered in matching black cloaks, and there must have been around 8 or 9 of them too. It's safe to say, though, that we booked it. We ran like we'd never ran before, straight back to the car and jumped in, starting up the engine and speeding off out of the quarry. 3 of us looked back to see if they were following us, and luckily, they weren't. They were just standing there, looking in our direction. The door to the motorhome was still open, though, and as we were driving away, we could see that it was lit by candlelight, and candlelight alone. And no wonder we could never see any light coming from the windows at night. Obviously, there could be an explanation for this, like maybe they were playing a trick on us because we used to play tricks on everyone else at the park. But either way, it was pretty terrifying. My son is one of the most honest little boys that I've ever met. I'm biased, I know, but still. I was very young when my son was conceived, and he was a huge shock to both me and his father, as I was actually on birth control. But nevertheless, he is the most loved and spoiled little boy ever. He is literally the light of all my darkness too, and there's definitely a reason as to why he's here, planned or not. He's meant for this world. My ex, father of my son, had a best friend who died exactly a year before my son was born. His name was Dean, and sadly he passed away on the 13th of July. My son was born exactly a year later on the 13th of July as well. Dean tragically lost his life from jumping into open water on a hot day, and his body instantly went into shock. he suffered a major heart attack and died within seconds. He was an extremely talented and thoughtful guy as well, and it was a huge loss for everyone that knew him. When I found out that I was pregnant with a little boy, my ex and I came to the decision to have Dean as my son's middle name as a tribute to his friend. We were extremely shocked when my due date was the 13th, and even more shocked when my son was born on his due date as well. We always knew that there would be a connection between both of them, as there were just too many coincidences. My ex and I split when my son was 6 months old, and he only sees him occasionally due to living many miles away. And naturally, my son never heard the story of Dean from me, as I didn't feel it was my place to tell it, and we wanted to ensure that he was old enough to understand anyway. But my son did all the regular strange things when he was small though, smiling and waving at nothing, talking and playing with someone no one could see, etc. He is also a regular sleepwalker, as am I. It's very common for him to be up and about at night, so I'm very used to his state when he's sleepwalking and when he's actually awake. He would sleepwalk and do strange things though, like try to run a bath or stand in the middle of his bedroom talking to walls, stuff like that, but you get used to it. Around 4 months ago though, he woke up calling me. Not distressed, but clearly wanted me in the room as soon as I could get there. I half expected him to be sleepwalking when I got there, but he was wide awake. He told me that in the middle of his bedroom he saw a boy with long hair in a pool of water, and he was smiling at him. It took me a while to be able to reply, as I was pretty shocked, obviously. I asked him if he was asleep or dreaming, and he said no. He'd woken up because he heard a splash and saw this boy. He went back to sleep eventually, and that weekend my son saw his dad, and I explained to my ex what had happened, and he was as shocked as I was. I explained that I thought it was time to tell him the story of Dean and see how my son would react. He agreed and told me that he would update me when he came to drop him off the following day. The next day my son came home, his usual bubbly self, and my ex updated me. He explained that he first told my son that he was named after one of his close friends who was now in heaven. He then proceeded to show him a picture of Dean, and my son instantly said, "Oh, that's the boy. That's the boy from the water. He was in my bedroom." My ex said that he was both freaked out and ecstatic that he'd come back to see my son. My ex then said that he was a lovely guy and that he would have loved my son. My son then said, "I know, he's very smiley. I know that water is very dangerous." And my ex was stunned. He nodded and said, "That's right," and that was how Dean had died. It's so true that children are just so much more open than us adults. And to this day, neither me or my ex can explain what happened, other than Dean visiting my son. I work second shift at my company, normally from 5 PM to 1 AM. On the street that I work, there are 2 ways for me to get home. To the left takes me over some train tracks. There's a 24-hour burger place and a Mexican fast food place that's open till about 3 AM. The police station is maybe 10-minute drives from the tracks too, and to the right it takes me straight to the highway, which gets me home. If I go to the left, I have to take side streets to get to the highway, as it doesn't connect for a few blocks, or go back over the tracks and past my workplace to get to the highway. I hope I didn't lose you there, but this is important. So, tonight I got out a bit early, about 12:30. Lucky me, right? I was hungry, so instead of going straight home, I decided to go for some burgers. Usually I have my window rolled down, listening to music on my phone. As I closed my car door, I realized a rather large spider. Okay, it was the size of my thumb, but it's still a big spider to me, has spun its web outside between my window and my side mirror. Spiders, they really freak me out. And if it had been inside, I would have beat Usain Bolt getting out of that car, let me tell you. Since it was outside, though, I contented myself to leave my windows rolled up and just blast my music. As I'm pulling out, I see the train barriers coming down. I'm not foolish enough to try and beat it, so I pull up and I wait for the barrier. As I'm waiting, I see movement out of the corner of my eye, and that was when I see him. A haggard man, maybe somewhere in his 30s, with dirty hair and clothes, standing right next to my car. We have a few homeless people around here, but they usually don't bother you if you just ignore them and don't talk to them. And I figured that he would go away eventually, but no. He walks to the driver's side and tries to open my car door. My car has automatic locks that activate pretty much as soon as you turn the car on, thank goodness. But he then starts banging on my car door window. He keeps screaming to let him in, and I reach for my phone, but of course I'm panicking and I can't get it out of my purse, and then immediately drop it down the side of my seat. I'm scared that he's going to break the glass or something at this point. I have a foldable nightstick in my car, but in my panic I forgot that it was there. I finally get a hold of my phone and dial 911. I'm screaming at him to back off and that I've called the police. He's going around trying to get in my car via the other doors, screaming at me the whole time, calling me about every name in the book, saying get out of the car. I'm giving the dispatcher my location, and it feels like forever for the cops to show up, but was likely only a few minutes. The guy, in the meantime, is crawling on top of my car and beating it with his fists. Of course, now the train is left and the barrier is up, but I don't want to risk killing this guy by flooring it over the tracks. I mean, I'm pretty sure that would be at least a manslaughter charge if he dies. I'm not sure about that, but I wasn't willing to take the risk of any jail time over this crazy person. Thankfully, I see the cop lights coming and he runs off and one of the responding officers gives chase. The other cop tells me to pull in at the burger place and calms me down. He takes all the information that I can remember in my panic state. He then says offhandedly something to the effect of, "Good thing your windows weren't down." And that was when it hit me. The only reason they weren't down was because of that spider on my car. They didn't find the guy either, as there's a crap ton of places to hide around here, and it's pretty rough terrain at night, but they did say that they would step up patrols around the area. But the cops assured me that I did everything right that I could have done, didn't get out of the car and called for help and all that. And after that, I decided to just skip eating out, as I just wasn't in the mood anymore, and just went home to have a freak out and methodically quadruple check all my doors and windows. The cops also said that they would call if they found anything, so we'll see, I guess. I don't know what his deal was, but it was a pretty terrifying situation. And these days, I don't mind spiders so much anymore. When I was a kid, I lived in the deep forest in northern Canada. For a few years, we lived in a very big, very old house, more than 2 hours from the nearest town. The house was built right next to an old indigenous graveyard. I'm talking at most 20 feet from the front door, in fact. I spent many hours playing on the land around our house and even sitting at the edge of the graveyard, wondering about it, but I never actually stepped a foot inside of it. There was a river running by the house that a young girl drowned in many years prior. The house wasn't lived in for a long time before us, but it was occasionally used by hunters. But we were very remote. We didn't have power or running water, and the nearest neighbors were just miles away. Now, my dad was raising cattle and often out in the barn, or about a 45-minute drive away at his parents' neighboring ranch. But one day he was in the barn and the door swung shut and locked him in there from the outside. He hollered for about 20 minutes, figuring someone had drove up and was messing with him. When suddenly, the door was unlocked and there was just nobody there. Nobody driving away and nothing. The first time we heard the chanting too was shortly after that incident. My mum and I were inside cooking dinner on the wood stove. It was completely dark outside, so it must have been winter, when all of a sudden, clear as day, we hear indigenous chanting coming from outside. But since my mum was still a little spooked by the barn incident, she figured that it was my stepdad messing with her and sort of tried laughing it off. Not even 5 minutes later, he comes over the radio from his parents' ranch 45 minutes away, saying that he was running late for dinner. It happened a number of times too, and I remember just laying awake in my mum's bed with her just listening. There were no other sounds around us as well, and it was unmistakable. My baby brother moved out of his room into their room as well because his door just kept slamming shut without any explanation, and stopped once he stopped sleeping in there. There was a lone wolf that wandered around our property at night. It never harmed us or any animals, but we saw it in the dark a few times, and there were always tracks as well. I remember dreaming of the same lady over and over again. She had long braids with a dandelion behind her ear, always wearing a red dress. I told my aunt that I was seeing her for real, but it was always in the middle of the night, so I can't be too sure if I was just dreaming or not. I went hysterical one night, though, apparently, crying to my mum because I was scared to die, completely out of the blue. I was a kid when these things happened, so I'm not super clear on all the details, but I always wondered if it was them and if they were upset with us or something. Eventually, though, we moved away and life moves on and we have a cool story that nobody believes. But then, just under 20 years later in a new town in a different province, I'm sitting in a Reiki session for my daughter for the first time, and halfway through, the therapist looks at me and says that she senses a strong indigenous spiritual presence around me. It's such a strong feeling, in fact, that she has to say something. She says that she can feel that I was accepted by these things as a young child, and now they're my guardians or something. So I guess in the end I got my answer. They were never angry to begin with. For me, anyways. So I have a story that I experienced as a 4-year-old boy that I need to get off my chest. I lived in a third world country in South America. My young parents moved into a new apartment. The owners had mental problems, both the mother and her son. And I don't remember them much, but from the stories I've heard, they were pretty scary people. Had a dark aura to them or something. Anyways, I remember seeing these mannequin-looking things move around the house while my parents were sleeping. And every night, I would see the same thing. They would hide in the washroom and in our living room and pretty much everywhere. There were at least 10 to 20 approximately. They looked human, but with no emotions, and their skin looked almost fake and pale, like plastic. My parents tell me, although I don't remember this, when we passed by normal stores with mannequins that I would start crying and they would be confused and didn't know why I was crying. I don't think my parents could see them at night, and they seemed to have a ghostly form and a physical form almost. Either way, though, it was hell just about every night seeing these things watching me from outside my parents' room. I sometimes slept beside them at that age. I also had a small crib because I was a very hyperactive child. I could hear them moving stuff around, and I remember seeing their emotionless faces. I could not go to the bathroom alone without my dad too because I was petrified. And then one day, while I was sleeping, I felt like I was just picked up and quickly woke up, and it was the mannequins, 2 of them. They tried to take me away, but they dropped me on the floor and quickly left. Something must have startled them because I have no idea why they let me go. When my parents woke up and quickly found me in the middle of the room on the floor, they had no idea what or who moved me, and it was only later on that I told them what happened when I was a teenager. Now, to give a bit more detail on their appearance, they had plastic-looking arms, they were pale, no hair on most of them or any facial expressions. They were average height, skinny to average weight, but not as skinny as mannequins. Dead eyes that I remember and will never forget. Had an androgynous look to them almost. But the aura was the most horrific thing that I've ever felt to this day. So, I need to share this somewhere, and I don't know really what I'm after, but I just think I want to know that I'm not crazy. My sister, 17 and female, and I, 20 female, were on holiday with our parents to the Bahamas. We stayed in this beautiful beachfront house with a fair bit of land surrounding it. On this stretch of beach, there were about 2 other houses, and it was maybe a kilometre with no other house about. My sister and I shared a room off the main living room with an ensuite. I had the double bed against one wall, and my sister was sleeping on the lower bed of a bunk bed opposite to me in the corner. My parents were sharing another room off the main living room on the other side. One night, I woke up suddenly to the sound of someone laughing. It was like a woman's voice, but laughing sort of like a jack-in-the-box. Nothing like I'd ever heard before, and it didn't even really sound human. It filled the entire room, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Lasted about 5 seconds, and I laid there absolutely frozen in bed until it stopped. Then my sister said, "Did you hear that?" in a shaken voice. And I whispered back yes, and she asked if it was me. I said no, obviously. and we both just laid there awake and in silence until the morning when my dad came in at 6 a.m. to ask if we wanted to watch the sunrise. We immediately told him everything, and he just didn't give a crap, thinking that we were imagining stuff or something. Although I'd like to think that we were well past the age of imagining things, especially since we both heard the same thing. We both have no idea what time this happened. I guess that it was about 3 a.m. judging by how long we laid in silence, but there isn't really any way to tell. I didn't check my phone as I was just too scared to move. Talking to my sister after, she said that she was awake before the laughing started and that the room just started rumbling, like as if a train was going past. It was shaking. The rumbling and the shaking intensified, and then the laughing started, and then I woke up and then it all just stopped suddenly. It couldn't have been any of us sleep talking, as we both heard it and we were both awake and nothing could possibly explain the noise. We both couldn't figure out where it was coming from too. If I had to place it, I thought it was on my sister's end of the room and she thought that it was on mine. We also can't compare it to anything like we've heard before, which is really strange. I don't know if anyone has an explanation or theory for this, even if they aren't exactly going to give me a piece of their mind. If I'm being honest too, it's kind of infuriating as my parents tease us about it all the time and we are deadly serious that this is inexplainable and it happened. If it helps too, this isn't the first time my sister and I have experienced apparent and inexplicable paranormal activity while sharing a room away from home. So I was a part of an access course that allowed older students who want to go to university to get the grades to get in. I was one of the youngest in the class at 23, 24 by the end of this story, with the vast majority of my class ranging between 32 and 53. And oh my goodness, there are so many stories that I could share about that class, the class from hell, but I digress. During the year, I pretty much kept to myself in class, being socially awkward and all, and I was still picked on by the rest of my class though, because I wasn't from the same area as everyone else, and my voice doesn't sound like I'm from where I said that I was from, which is incredibly petty if you ask me, but it is what it is. That actually was one of the reasons though that I ended up befriending a girl who was named Tina. Now, Dave was a 40-year-old man who was strange to say the least. Just to let you know, Dave was slightly shorter than me. I'm 5'10". He was overweight, balding, with the hair that he had being grey at the sides and black at the top. Looked really greasy and, honestly, just looked a bit older than he was, but to his credit, he was always fairly well dressed. Dave was well liked though, and was selected to be the class representative, but he always just seemed off and actually made me feel very uncomfortable because he always was acting weird towards me. He would always look like he was forcing a smile and was constantly bragging about things that, well, aren't exactly brag-worthy. I've worked the last 3 days on 12-hour shifts and still made it to college because education is important. Stuff like that. I've only spoken to Dave outside the group project 2, maybe 3 times, and every time he just came across as though something was wrong, even though the conversations were basically elevator talk with a touch of bragging. So I just kept contact to a minimum with him. He openly made statements in class like, I can tell if someone is mentally ill just by looking at them, and young people today don't understand the idea of getting off their asses and working. They'd rather take, to give you an impression of what kind of person he was. On a number of occasions too, I felt like someone was just watching me, and when I would check, I would immediately see who it was, and I bet you can guess who it was, right? Yep, Dave. As the year went on though, my class got worse while he was keeping up on the I'm a nice guy routine. Honestly, I just ignored him most of the time, but did wonder what was making the class become worse. But this was a while after the group project thing. It wasn't until the last day though that I found out why. I was talking to Tina, saying how amazing it was that we both completed the course and got on with our lives, till Tina said, I know, thank God, I don't have to see Dave again. He was really creepy. I don't know what his deal was. I asked her what she meant by that, which prompted her to say, hold on, do you know what he's been saying? Tina told me everything that he said. and all of it was about me. According to Tina, Dave had been saying some crazy stories revolving around me and would always ask her questions about me and my life, asking her about where I grew up and what I wanted to do with my life, about my family even. That really creeped me out, but then came the stories that he was telling to my class. Dave had been saying a lot apparently, to the point that if I knew about this at the time, I would have reported him for harassment or something. Anything to get him as far away from me as possible. Apparently, he'd been saying how I'm a desperate attention seeker who was begging him to be friends with me, saying how I used mental illness and health problems for people to feel sorry for me and get better grades, and how I don't deserve to go to university because I'm fake. Those made me laugh at first because of how pathetic I thought that was, considering we barely spoke, but then it felt uncomfortable because somehow he knew about my health problems, and considering that no one except the lectures knew about them, I wondered how exactly he found out about them. But then came the wild stories that never even happened. According to Dave, I tried to hug him multiple times. One story was when he told me that he got into university, allegedly, and I was jumping for joy and forcibly hugged him, screaming how proud I was of him as he awkwardly and unwillingly hugged me back before pushing me away. The second story, we were leaving class when I turned in front of the lecturer and forcibly hugged him again as he resisted before I skipped out of the room saying, "See you later, friend," with the lecturer and him mocking me after I left. The third, and my personal favourite, is supposedly during another class. I turned to Dave and was yet again trying to force him to hug me, but this time he kept telling me to stop, but I laughed at his cries. It wasn't until the lecturer intervened by saying, "Stop it, you are not friends," that apparently I stopped. I was taken aback by the stories and thought maybe it was still made up for amusement or something. But no, when I saw another girl in my class, I tried to ask her about the rumors, but the second I mentioned his name, the girl screamed at me, "Leave Dave alone, you psycho. Honest to God, why the hell are you so obsessed with him? He'll never talk to you." And she just stormed off. Obviously, I was pretty shocked. Tina apologized to me for not telling me sooner, but she honestly didn't know. Now, just so you know, I hate confrontation. Most of the time I just try to avoid it, but I just couldn't let this one go. I don't care if people call me names, that's just a basic insult, and coming from my class who knew nothing about me, it made those kind of comments even more meaningless. But commenting on my character, saying made-up stories and calling me crazy, I do not take that well. Later on in the day, I saw Dave, but when I approached him to confront him about all of this, he looked as though he saw a ghost and he just ran away. I ended up messaging Dave on Facebook, and I sure hope that this is the end of it, but somehow, I'm not so sure. It creeps me out to this day that all this time he had been talking to me and imagining these incidences while I was just none the wiser. And I, for one, hope that I never see him again. When I was 15, I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma with my sister and my mum to live with an uncle that I had never met before. As horrible as he was too, he is not the main focus in this story. So my uncle would pick up random men around the city and pay them to work for him. He owned his own tree trimming business and he honestly treated them all horribly. This one guy he hired though, I won't state his name here, eventually moved in and started regularly working for my uncle. Let's call him S. He was a major alcoholic, but he seemed like an all-around nice kind of helpful guy. He would always offer to help with things that I or my mum were working on. I remember a time that he bought cookie dough only for me to end up eating it, and when he asked what happened to it, I admitted, and he responded, "I don't blame you, it's delicious. That's what it's meant for." Soon after moving in, he came in drunk to have a conversation with my mum in our living room. She obliged. Again, he came across as a very open-hearted, kind person, so it was really a pleasure speaking with him. A while into the conversation, and he slips in something pretty unnerving. He tells her that if there's anyone around who's harmed her or is making her life hell, that he would take care of them. My sister recently rekindled an old flame, and he ended up moving out here to stay with us and whatnot. Immediately upon his arrival, issues occurred between my uncle and him. But nothing too big, just mainly arguments. Let's call her boyfriend M. So right before M moved out there to live with us, he was depending on a huge settlement from a work accident. And well, he got it, and he kept it all in cash. Over the past couple of weeks upon his arrival, my sister and him quickly faded out of love. My uncle proposed a job offer to S about an apartment downtown. My uncle was also a carpenter, houses, apartments, etc. The job proposal was that S move into this apartment to live while he worked on it, so my uncle didn't have to. Again, he picks up guys to work for him, so he can give them crap pay because he's an all-round asshat. S happily accepts the offer though, I'm sure because not only is he getting paid, but he gets to live apart from his abusive jerk of a boss, which was good for him. After my sister and M lose interest in each other, he inquires about moving with S into this new apartment to live and help work. They ended up moving in there, and M's settlement money came within the month after his move into the apartment with S. So we ended up moving into our house a few minutes away, and my sister lost contact with him. One night, my sister, Mum, and I are all sitting in the living room, and my mum's phone rings, breaking the late-night silence. It's my uncle, and only a few seconds into the phone call, does her face contort into that kind of disbelief and horror look. I come and sit on the rug in front of her, inquisitively. I can tell by looking at her, and I can tell by the cold shift in the atmosphere that something was horribly wrong. She was looking around the house fretfully in response to our caller. "Okay, just calm down. Tell me exactly what happened." And what happened? Well, my uncle went over to M and S's apartment. It's around 11 PM, I believe. When he arrives, he notices that the door is slightly ajar. That's obviously a little bit unnerving, so he pushes the door open and the apartment is pitch black. He brings out his flashlight, and there's someone on the couch, but they aren't in any relatively normal position. They're kind of slumped over the arm, the head on the seat, and my uncle walks closer, calling out for M and S, and the closer he walks, the more the details magnify surreally. There is blood and brain matter all over the man and the couch. He had been brutally bludgeoned to death. My uncle runs out of the apartment in terror. He calls the police. He calls my mum. My sister begins to cry as my uncle is identifying. Yes, I think it is M. It aired on the news soon after that, but they didn't give an identity. By the description of the physical characteristics, it was clearly her recent ex-boyfriend, M. And so, where was S and where was all of M's settlement money? Well, nobody ever saw or heard from him again until 3 years later, when he was captured and sentenced to jail. And that's the story of the time that I lived with a murderer. So I'm an insomniac, and 2 weeks ago, I felt like I wasn't going to be able to sleep, so I decided to go and take a walk to relax a bit. It was around 12:30. Considering that I'm 6'2" and a 250-pound man in decent shape, I never felt scared to walk at night, thinking that people would be more scared to see me than the opposite. But around 10 minutes into my walk, I just got a chill in my spine. Something just wasn't right, and I glanced around me and noticed someone on the other side of the street wearing a hoodie and walking. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it's just another insomniac maybe, but the chill just wouldn't go away. Something was definitely off about this guy. I started walking faster at this point and decided that I would cut my walk short and just go back home, but the guy kept the pace and he even started to walk faster than me. At that point, I was sweating like crazy, but I went faster. 2 minutes had passed, and I turned my head again to get a better look at the guy. That's when I noticed that somebody else was catching up on my side of the road, also wearing a hoodie. My brain went into panic mode, and I started running as fast as I could. Soon after, I heard their footsteps catching up, and at that point, I was near my house, so I knew the layout by heart. I jumped over a bike rack and went down into the dirt trail that went into a small forest near my house. I know, looking back, the forest was definitely not the safest choice. I knew that they were still following me, but were not right on my tail since there was a delay before they hit the dirt path. My lungs were just on fire, but I didn't care. I diverged from the main path and I went into the forest, running through the trees in a smaller path that led to one of the neighbors' backyards. I ran up on the other side of my street to my house and turned the corner and went through the bushes around my house and entered using my back door. With my whole body on fire by that point, I peeked through my window and saw them just run past my house. I was safe, but I saw something that made my body turn from burning to freezing in a split second. Both of them had knives in their hands. And I mean big knives. I don't know if it was because of the running or because of the fear, probably both, but eventually I threw up. I was lucky that night, I know. About 4 years ago, I worked as a laundress. I worked 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. and would often work alone. We usually have a security guard posted near the parking lot. They carry a radio and pepper spray, and later in the day they patrol the building. A new guy had started though, and I never saw him watching over the parking lot when I came in each morning. Throughout my shift, he would come into my laundry room. He was talkative, but I noticed that he would look at my body a lot when he thought I wouldn't notice. One day, I came into work and started putting my stuff away, getting ready to begin. I hadn't turned on all the lights yet, so there were parts of the room I couldn't see, when suddenly I hear radio static in the corner of the room and I see a red radio light. I turn on the lights and the new guy is in the corner of the room, just hiding and watching me. When I asked what he was doing there, he said that he was just hanging out and started laughing. It was obvious that he was waiting for me. He ended up doing this so often too that I ended up just getting used to it. But I came in early one day and was working in one of our smaller areas. He came into the smaller room to talk to me. He's a big guy, so I couldn't get around him. He was just talking to me, but I couldn't move or leave the room because he blocked the door. He asked me why I came in early that day, and I told him it was because I had to leave early later, and he told me that I was required to tell him all my hours so that he always knew where I was. He was leaning over me. He was very tall, and I honestly felt like he was about to try and upset me. I had this horrible feeling in my stomach too, that he was about to try something, so I pushed past him and called my supervisor, who said that he would keep an eye on him. I told him that I just had a bad gut feeling about this guy and that I needed to leave for the day. And the next day, he was fired. And apparently, he wasn't in the guard tower at the start of his shift because he would spend the mornings in the woods near the parking area recording girls walking in there for their shifts each morning. They also found a huge collection of pop soda cans, coffee cups in his locker that he admitted he dug out from the various trash bins around where I and the other girls worked. And his wife shortly left him after that and took full custody of their newborn baby. For those unfamiliar with Grindr, it's a gay dating app that shows guys nearby. It makes you use your location while using the app, but it doesn't give you your exact location unless you send it to the person directly. Anyways, I got a message from a blank profile one day. No name, no pic, and no bio. The only thing that popped up was how close he was, less than a mile. This happens a lot because, well, there's lots of closeted guys out there, especially back then. Being an overweight guy in the gay community, I had to take anything that I could get because most gay guys in my community wouldn't even give me the time of day. He started off nice though, introduced himself as Jesus and asked how I was doing and all that sort of small talk. And yes, Jesus is a bit of a common name in some cultures. He told me that he was into chubbier guys though, and after exchanging pics, we both agreed that we found the other one attractive. He asked me if I would like to come over to play video games and maybe have some fun. I'd only met a couple of guys off of Grindr at this point, and although we had some good times, it ultimately just didn't pan out. However, I'd always met them somewhere public first, so I'd never met anyone at their place or anyone come over to mine. I figured, though, that it had been long enough and some casual fun might be nice. Plus, he was really cute and actually my type. He agrees to come and pick me up since I'm only a few blocks away. Apparently, he lived in the nearby trailer park. I decided that I'd like to shower first, and he says he'll head over. And then he says that he's really embarrassed to ask, but wonders if I'd be willing to lend him $20. Supposedly he lived with his mum and she had left for the weekend without any food or money for him or something. I know that it was really stupid in hindsight, but I honestly felt really bad for him. I tell him that I actually don't have any cash, but he says that that's okay. I can just send him some money through an app. I don't remember what it was called, but it was something like Venmo. I go ahead and send it though and take my shower and then let him know that I'm ready. He says that he's heading out, but he can't find his keys. I say it's okay and I'll just wait outside for him. I hadn't given him my address yet, but I was almost ready to. However, when I asked if he had found them, he just never responded. Minutes went by and then an hour, and I messaged him again to ask if he was still coming, and I could see him going on and offline, so I know that he read my messages. I finally just accepted that he was ghosting me and probably just wanted money. So I messaged him one last time and just told him that that was pretty messed up, as well as explained that had he just asked, I would have given him money without having to go through all of that. But what can I say? I can be a softie sometimes. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I never heard back from him, so I just blocked him. I get another message from someone on Grindr relatively close to me, and his profile is also blank, which definitely raises my suspicions. He tells me that he's also into chubby guys, which really makes me suspicious because it's highly unlikely two chubby chasers live so close to me. We trade pics again, and it's a different guy, but he suddenly asks for money again. In Grindr, you can create as many accounts as you'd like. All you need is an email address. But there were tons of spam accounts on there that are automated. It was a real pain. But anyway, I called him out because I was like 95% sure that it was Jesus. At first he acts like he doesn't know what I'm talking about, calls me crazy and then blocks me. I felt a little bit bad because I thought maybe I'd made a mistake and just chased off a guy for nothing. But then again, his sudden offensive reaction definitely made me have my doubts. Weeks go by though, and every so often this same guy tries to fool me, even though I don't fall for it. Eventually, I blow up on him and ask him what the hell his problem is. We start going at it, and eventually he says, "You wouldn't say this stuff to my face." I tell him that I would gladly tell him to get lost in person, not that I expected him to actually show up this time, and he responded with, "Alright, we'll see about that. Be there soon." Now, I was a little worried at this point because it crossed my mind that he may not actually be gay and might be some sort of homophobe looking to bash some gay guys. My mind, for some reason, always goes back to those men who have been murdered after meeting up with someone on Grindr. However, I realized that I never gave him my address, so I should be fine. So I say, "Nice try, but I never gave you my address." He says, "Yes, you did, stupid. You just didn't know it was me. Be ready, I'm on my way." At this point, my anxiety starts setting off because I did give my address to a guy who had to cancel last minute, but I didn't think anything of it because it was way before Jesus had messaged me a second time. I try to think about what to do, so I try to decide and document his threats. I say, "I know that I didn't give you my address, and besides, what do you want to do with me anyway?" And he says, "You'll see, I've got something for you." Now, the trailer park is always having police go by there, and my neighborhood is separated from theirs by a bayou. At night, I always heard gunshots out there, so I began to panic a bit. I mean, what if he had a gun, or what if he brought friends with him? I say, "Oh yeah, then what's that?" He says, "Something that'll shut you up. I'm outside." I started freaking out because I honestly couldn't tell if he was just trying to mess with me or if he really was outside. I had been screenshotting everything and sent it to the Grindr admins to report him for credible threats of violence. I wasn't sure if I could call the cops or not because if he was lying, I didn't want to look stupid. Plus, I wasn't sure if it was even enough for them to do anything anyway. I decided to peek outside from the upstairs window and see if I could spot him. If I could get the make and model of his car, then maybe I could at least have something to give the cops, if need be. I live in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so when I look out the window, I can see all the way to the end of the street, and when I looked out, I saw a car that I had never seen before parked on the side of the road at the end. My heart was pounding because somehow I just knew that it was him, but a part of me was hoping that it wasn't. I decided that I'd test him and see if he really was out there, and I said, "Well, I'm waiting." And he said, "I'm outside already. Where are you?" Of course, I wasn't, but if that was him and he did know my address, then why wouldn't he just park outside of my house? And sure enough, I was right. He says, "Yeah, I see you. You're going to get it now." And then I say, "Then give it to me. I'm right here." And he says, "Just you wait." I knew that he couldn't see me from his car because I was peeking out discreetly, and our windows have a privacy shade on them where people only see a black screen from the outside. A few more minutes go by, and eventually the car just takes off. I have a feeling that he used Grindr to triangulate the area of where my neighborhood was, but of course he just couldn't find my exact house because it hadn't been him who I'd given my address to. Grindr later sent me a message saying that he'd been banned from the app and they contacted the local authorities. I never heard anything else after that, so I don't really know what became of it. The cops never contacted me too if they did pay him a visit, and I just never heard from him again. These days I'm actually married, so I don't use Grindr anymore, thankfully. But still, it took a while before I was able to sleep soundly after that. I rarely left the house too, and when I did, I always made sure that his car just wasn't around anywhere. In hindsight, he was probably just a stupid kid that just wanted to troll people. But then again, maybe not. These stories were told to me by my stepmom, and she's okay with me retelling them to you guys. All of these stories take place over 20 years ago, and she hasn't had anything like what she shared with me since. Other than the haunting that I personally experienced, that is, but that's a different story altogether. So, back when my stepmom was a little girl, around 8 years old, she lived in Mexico with her parents and 5 other siblings. My stepmom is the eldest, and because of that, she shared a room with the babies of her family. But one night she explained how she was woken just kind of randomly and saw these 2 little kids holding hands and standing right next to her bed. She said that they were see-through and that they just stared at her, unmoving. She was terrified, but didn't make a noise as to not wake her siblings, and instead just remained frozen in place. After a while, she blinked and they just vanished as if they weren't there at all. She went back to sleep, brushing it off as just some sort of a dream or something, and in the morning she didn't say a word to her parents. Over the course of a few weeks, she started seeing glimpses of the 2 kids throughout her house, but it was always out of the corner of her eye. On one morning, she was in the kitchen helping her siblings get some breakfast when she looked up and she saw the kids right by her youngest baby brother. She immediately grabbed what was closest to her, a wooden spoon, and launched herself at the kids, shouting at them to leave her brother alone. They disappeared, and her siblings were all confused as none of them had seen it. She told them that it was alright though, and then just continued on with her day. Eventually, she said that she started to see them almost every night. She'd awake from dreams that she couldn't remember and would see them just staring down at her, their faces void of any emotion, but always holding hands for some reason. She tried telling them to go away and leave her family alone, and they'd disappear, only to come back at night. Eventually one day she saw them actually move and reach a hand out towards her mother. She screamed at them to not touch her mum, and they snapped their heads to look at my stepmom. She stood her ground and told them to leave her alone, and they vanished again. Her mother quickly started asking her what the problem was, and she explained what she had been seeing. Her mother instantly freaked out and told her father what had happened. As soon as he heard, they took my stepmom out of the house and to her aunt's place. They didn't say anything, but that they'd bring her siblings with them and that they'd be staying with her aunt for a bit. My stepmom later learned that when her mother was pregnant with her, that she had seen the same kids and they had tried to touch her stomach, where my stepmom was still unborn. After her mother gave birth to my stepmom, she stopped seeing them, so when my stepmom told her mother how she had been seeing those kids, she really freaked out. In fact, they ended up calling for a priest and eventually just moved out of that house. A couple of years later, they moved to the United States and everything was fine. My stepmom explained how she remembered occasionally seeing people wandering around looking lost, but that she could see through them. She ignored it, and after a few years, she just stopped seeing them. Fast forward quite a few years to when my stepmom was single and had 3 kids, all very young, babies and toddlers, as she lived 2 houses down from her parents' house where some of her brothers were currently staying. During the time that she was living there, she always felt like someone was watching her, and she just felt this really angry atmosphere around her, is what she said to me. She explained it like trying to relax but kind of getting stuck and being tense. And she didn't live in that house long, and here's why. On the last night that she slept there, she woke up to something or someone pushing down on her chest. She kept trying to get up or throw her arms at whatever was pushing her down, but her hands just kept hitting air. She struggled for a few minutes, just feeling this weight on her, continuously pushing until she suddenly was able to throw herself upright. She immediately got out of bed and grabbed her kids and ran down to her parents' house. She frantically knocked on the door until her brothers opened it up and let her in. They were worried and asked what was wrong. They had never seen my stepmom so scared before. She's the kind of person who will not hesitate to fight someone to protect people and doesn't take crap from anybody. She also raised her siblings, so they've always seen her as a very strong person. She explained what happened and told them that she refused to go back in that house. Her brothers led her to sit down and she made sure that her kids were alright, and that's when one of her brothers noticed that she had this huge bruise on her chest. She went to the bathroom to look in the mirror and, sure enough, there was this really large bruise that looked like misshapen hands almost. And needless to say, she spent the night there with her kids, and in the morning, she explained to her parents what had happened. She still refused to go back to that house, and her brothers ended up moving everything out of the house for her. She moved somewhere else, and to this day, she still hasn't set foot anywhere near that house, and refuses to get even close to it. She has no idea who the owners, and if any of them had any sort of experience like she did there. She just blatantly refuses to have anything to do with that house. She told the story to my dad once, and he tried to say it was sleep paralysis, but she vividly remembers being able to move around, just unable to get up, and she had multiple witnesses to the bruises that she got from it as well. She won't talk much about it, but swears that something evil is definitely living in that house. I currently work in a hospital where I take blood from patients. I always thought that I'd experience more paranormal activity than I do, but I just put it down to the fact that, well, I'm in the lab and I don't really go anywhere near the morgue, etc. So lately, I've been working the most in a hospital or seniors home deal. There are 2 wings that project from the cottage hospital, one for seniors who are in their right minds but simply can't take care of themselves, and one for people with dementia and Alzheimer's and all that. Now, the way the blood collection lab is set up, when you're in the lab itself, you walk through a doorway to go into the blood collection area, and directly to your left is the doorway to the small waiting area. Now, on this one day, the lab tech or the co-worker is at an x-ray and I'm on my own, and as I walk from the lab to the blood collection area, I see out of the corner of my eye an elderly man just sitting in a chair. I notice that there are no labels that have been printed, so I turn to ask him if he's waiting for blood work or for an x-ray or something, and when I do, there's just nobody there. I laugh it off, assuming that it's just my imagination. I will always take the more common, normal answer over anything else, and I just get on with my day. Except, 2 more times, all about 5 minutes apart as well, the same thing happens. In one sighting, he's still sitting. In another, he's standing looking at the door, and each time it's just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye. until I look directly at him and there's nothing there. I'm still assuming that there's nothing odd about this. My mind just must be playing tricks on me. Until my co-worker comes back from the x-ray and she's passing the door, stops and spins around and then starts laughing. Hey, I was completely sure that I just saw some old guy standing in the doorway. I told her that I'd seen the same thing 3 times, and we were both kind of creeped out at this point. To be honest, I was a little more upset that maybe he was trying to communicate and we couldn't hear him or see him except for those quick flashes. Later that day, we also learned that one of our casual customers from the home had actually died that night in his sleep. So at the time of this story, my grandmother had unfortunately passed away and was no longer around to bless the home. My mum and I had moved out prior to my grandma's passing for various reasons, and my uncle, who was still in his teens, took over the room. We had to move back in during the time my grandma was sick to help out, and just stayed afterwards for a year or so, but in the room across from my uncle. My uncle and I had a relationship like brother and sister, so he would constantly pick on me and pull pranks on me, as did I. He would specifically ask me, though, to not go into his room and mess with his things, which I took as a bit of a challenge. My grandma had passed at this point, and he started experiencing a lot of things in the room himself. His dog would stay in the room with him, although it took tons of coaxing for her to even enter, and even then she would just bark all night. I was still too young for anyone to really be explaining any of these things to me. However, I now see why my uncle was more irritable and anxious during this time. So on this particular day, he asked me not to be in his room, and I was feeling extremely ballsy and entered it anyways. I ran to the very end of the room and started playing with his Pokemon collection when he found me and got mad and basically was like, "Fine, if you like being in here so much, then stay," and turned off the light and shut the door real quick. I got nervous because the room was huge to me, and it was pitch dark with the smallest bit of light coming from the crack underneath the door. I ran as fast as I could to open the door, but it just wouldn't open, and I assumed that my uncle was holding it shut, so I began to plead with him to open it. He laughed and told me no. I began to cry, and that's when I heard footsteps. I turned my back to the door to face the dark room and kept hearing something running around me. I was so scared in that moment because I couldn't see in front of me, but knew something was just terribly wrong. And then I heard it run up the wall too. I strained my eyes to look into the dark, and I could see an outline of a person or thing on the corner of the wall, and it turned to face me. It seemed to choose a significant spot so that I could see it, and it just had a white face with the blackest eyes and mouth that I'd ever seen. It smiled at me and then jumped down. My fight or flight kicked in at that moment as I could hear it running towards me, and I could hear it breathing heavy and just knew that it was on a mission. I began screaming and kicking at the door. My uncle through this ordeal was trying to open the door but couldn't. I could hear my grandpa scolding him for locking me in and was trying to open it as well but struggled. And finally the door opened at just the last moment, and I ran out of that room and into my backyard and cried my eyes out. I explained to my grandpa what I saw, and he was obviously very skeptical and assumed my uncle scared me into believing such a thing was true. This actually tended to be an issue with him, being skeptical and all that, but I would say majority rules, right? The whole ordeal probably lasted 10 minutes, but it honestly felt like a lifetime to me. It has created a phobia for me too, to be in a dark room for too long, ever since. My garage actually accidentally locked me out one day, and I was stuck in the dark, and it caused me to have an anxiety attack. I still remember the whole thing just so vividly too, and it was very impactful. I never wanted to be in that room again after that, and I avoided it at all costs. We eventually moved out of the home, and it was such a relief, but that thing still haunts me in my thoughts and nightmares sometimes. I often wonder what would have happened had I been there even a minute longer. I wish that I could rationalize it so bad, but the fear it instilled in me was very real and very traumatizing too. I honestly wish it on nobody else. We did have more paranormal encounters after that, but this one was very personal to me, and definitely one of the creepiest. When I was really young, I lived in my grandparents' home with my mum. She was still fairly young herself, and my grandma would actually babysit me while my mum worked. My grandma also had quite a history with the paranormal, and I would even consider her a kind of medium of sorts. She didn't cope with it well and had an alcohol addiction to soothe the noise. It ultimately took her life too, and it was a huge loss for me since I was pretty close to her. However, I'm getting sidetracked, so let's stick to the main story. So, with my grandma's abilities, it's pretty safe to say that the afterlife and all things death would kind of gravitate towards her. And there were a lot of things that were allegedly seen by her, and some were straight up evil. I have no real knowledge whether this thing was actually with her prior to my grandparents moving in, or if it was something attached to my grandma, but whatever it was not good. So one day, my mum and I were in our room that we shared, and it was around Christmas time. We left the TV on as a comfort for my mum, and she experienced a lot of things in this room that made her pretty fearful. I had no knowledge of this since I was 4 or 5, and my mum wouldn't tell me these things for obvious reasons. So anyway, we would just leave it on. I remember waking up from my sleep though, and looking at the TV and seeing that Mr. Pac-Man was on. I don't know if anyone else remembers that being a show, but I do, and I kept hearing creaking and noticed that our door was open. I didn't think too much of it and just walked into the hallway where the creaking was much louder. I stepped facing our living room, and then I saw a shadow man pacing back and forth in the living room in front of our tree. I wasn't threatened by it in the slightest and just kind of sat down on the floor to watch. I honestly thought in my heart that I was just witnessing Santa Claus and just fell into a trance state and just kind of watched on as this thing paced. But then it just stopped and faded away, and my mum came over and asked what I was doing, and I said that I saw Santa. My mum was actually more annoyed and tired that I was out of bed, so she really paid no attention to what I had said and then just took me back to bed. Now, years later, I actually told her the story, and she was pretty shocked and relayed all of her experiences to me as well. Some were very terrifying, which I believe too, since I myself have witnessed the type of things she described, and it's given me a phobia of the dark too. I believe the activity got worse with my grandma's passing because she was no longer there to bless the home, and I often wonder if it was a dream, but every time I think of it, I become super uncomfortable, and it becomes hard to justify that. So my husband and I were coming back from the grocery store one day. My mum currently lives with me along with my 2 siblings, and on this particular day, I had her watching my daughter while I went shopping, and on our way back home as we were entering our neighborhood, I saw my mum's car coming towards us. I asked my husband if that was her car since she has a very common car, and he said it looks like her. When it came to turn, they were right next to us, and I went to see if it was her driving, and as did my husband, and as we both looked, it appeared as if my mum was driving and my sister was in the front seat. They were waving at us, and just then we turned into our street and they went on by. It all happened really fast, but I know what I saw, and even my husband, who is very skeptical, has no explanation for this. Because I called my mum to see where she was going with my kids, jokingly of course, and she didn't answer. I was super confused because if she had been driving, she normally has her phone connected to the Bluetooth for music and to use the GPS as she's pretty unfamiliar with the city. I just brushed it off though, and we parked and unloaded our groceries, and my husband opens the door and in comes running my daughter with my mum following suit. I was super confused at first and quite shocked to be honest. My mum looked at me very concerned as to why I was staring at her like some foreign creature, and then I proceeded to explain exactly what happened. She was meekly as shocked too, and since I had my husband to back me up, we got pretty freaked out and went down this rabbit hole of other dimensions and whatnot. I know it all sounds crazy, but honestly, I just can't rationalize this any logical way. I just moved out of my childhood home, and I wanted to share all the creepy stories that I saved up from there. For reference, I lived in the home from the time I was 10 to 11 to the time I was 18. So in the 80s, my grandparents, aunt and dad, lived in the home for a minute. When my papa was doing all repairs in the guest bedroom, and as he tore down the wall, he found a few wooden toys stuck in the wall. Without thinking, he took out the toys and continued working. And for a week, the house was just crazy. Things were flying off counters, they were hearing voices, seeing things. My nana yelled at my papa until he put the toys back in the wall, and as soon as he did, it all just stopped. Additionally to that story, we had a computer room just inside the front door where, funnily enough, we put a futon for company to sleep. Every time I went into that room, I always felt bad, like I wasn't allowed in the room and like I was being watched. It honestly just made my skin crawl, and whenever I was home alone, I'd shut the door before anyone left because I just couldn't handle the idea of being home alone with the room in view. Sometimes I'd go in to get something and it'd just smell like floral perfume as well. My mum's a hippie and only ever really wears oils, and my sister never wore perfume, so there was no way that it was either of them. Eventually, since my nana is very close to me, I told her about it, and it just so happened to be the room where my papa found the toys. We think the people who lived there before us may have actually taken the toys out. Every single night I lived in the house, it also sounded like someone was walking through the house with boots. I couldn't have friends over at night because they'd get scared and just want to leave. I remember up to the last night, in fact, that I spent in the house, I always heard those footsteps. But for the entire time I lived in the home, I lived in the basement, which had a living room, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. I lived in the farthest bedroom right across from the bathroom. But when I was younger, I had insomnia pretty bad, so I'd stay up often and play on my phone or something to that effect. One night I was laying in bed and heard soft scratching at my door, which was odd. At first I thought it was my cat though, so I called for her and called and nothing came. Eventually I went out to investigate and I searched the entire basement and I couldn't find either 2 of my cats, and my dogs refused to go downstairs, so it definitely wasn't them. Now, the only way to get into the basement is down the steps, and the steps are old and they're woody and they creak. One of my cats is very fat and she makes thumping noises going down the steps too. And I didn't hear any of that, so I'm pretty sure it wasn't them. My other cat had long nails and she would grab at the crappy carpet as she walked, which made soft padding sounds too. And I didn't hear any of that either. After realizing neither cat was downstairs and didn't make the scratching noise, I just ran back to my room and didn't leave until the morning. The next day I was home alone and I just got home from school and I was making a snack when I heard 3 soft knocks against the wall right in front of me. I froze and asked if anyone was there, and it took a moment, but there were 3 more knocks. I instantly remembered what the ghost investigator people said to do and called out politely, "Look, I'll share this house with you, but you can't scare me like this anymore. It's not okay. Please go away." And then it stopped. One night, I was standing in the middle of my room being goofy and just dancing to music. I stopped moving too because my music suddenly cut out, and then I felt something tug at the bottom of my t-shirt. I was standing in the middle of the room where it was impossible for my shirt to get snagged on anything. Additionally, one night I was leaving my room and I went to grab the doorknob, and before I could grab it, it just started shaking violently. I was scared half to death, but I grabbed the doorknob and after a moment of it shaking, it just stopped. Growing up, my sister and I would wake up at the same time to get ready for school. She'd always go upstairs to get ready since there was an extra bathroom, but she'd leave her room light on, which was directly to the left of mine. I remember all throughout my middle school and high school years as I got ready for school that I'd always see these black figures out of the corner of my eye, mainly walking past the light of my sister's bedroom. And as I got older, I started seeing the figures more frequently in creepier positions. I remember one time I was in the kitchen talking to my mum and I saw a figure on all 4s with its back hunched up, sitting there just kind of facing us. But when I looked in the direction that it was gone. In my stepdad and mum's room, there was a queen-size bed that took up the majority of the room, and across from the bed was a small cove, the closet and the door leading out to the hallway. And one night, my mum woke up from the dead of sleep to find a man in the cove just watching her. He had, in her words, old-timely church vibers, a button-up, sunken eyes, and a lot of wrinkles. She told me that she didn't feel scared and that she didn't feel anything at all, in fact. She just closed her eyes and eventually went back to sleep. But we were talking one night while she was doing laundry. I was sitting on the basement stairs halfway up and she was in the laundry room to the right of me. We were chatting until all of a sudden she just exclaims, "Hey, don't do that." And I laughed and asked what I did wrong, and she shook her head and said that the old man spooked me and he was standing right behind me. Apparently, too, she sees him a lot but doesn't tell anyone because it just doesn't bother her. At the end of sophomore year of high school, my sister graduated in December and moved out. So naturally, I moved into her room thinking it was less haunted compared to my room. No way. My sister failed to tell anyone that she had seen a figure in her closet the entire time that she lived there, and that is why she nailed her closet shut. So one night, it was late and I had all the lights off and was laying in bed talking on the phone with my girlfriend at the time. At the foot of my bed was a dresser facing me with one drawer slightly open because, well, I'm lazy. My girlfriend and I were talking about nothing in particular. I was staring in the darkness when, all of a sudden, something faintly green glows from the dresser drawer. At first, I thought something with batteries had just surged or something to that effect, so I turned on the lights to investigate, and all that was in the drawer was notebooks. Not a single thing that could glow in the pitch black like that. My girlfriend and I talked about it for a while, and we just couldn't think of any rational explanation for what it was. So on another occasion, I had just got home from school. My stepdad was at work, and so was my mum. I was tired, so I went to take a nap. I'm slightly paranoid, so I remember vividly locking the front and back door before going down for a nap. About an hour later, I woken up from my dogs growling. Now, my dogs are very sweet and pretty much never ever growl, and definitely not like this. So I panicked and grabbed my pocket knife and went upstairs to find them both on my parents' bed growling at the window. I looked outside and there was nothing there. Then, almost as if on cue, I hear footsteps behind me. My dogs ran to investigate and were barking like crazy, and I followed after them and I searched the whole house with them and we didn't find anything. Nothing, except the back door was unlocked and open. We never had a spare key, so that was impossible, and we have cameras, and there was nothing on the cameras. I had my stepdad check, and there wasn't anyone in the house, and I just felt like I was going crazy at this point. Eventually, my mum came home early from work, though, to calm me down, and that was a pretty crazy moment. But one night, my mother and I were coming home from grocery shopping. My stepdad was at work, and it was just the two of us, so we were in a decent mood. We were in the dining room, just off the kitchen, putting groceries away while joking that our house was hell. And my stepdad was a royal pain, and we were joking that he was the devil, when all of a sudden, a tin poster just flew off the wall. We lived a house down from the train tracks, and the house shakes often. And even that hadn't made the poster fall off, but the one time that we talk about our home being hell, it slams to the ground, which was weird. Back in February, my stepdad was in the garage, which wasn't attached to the house, but instead across the backyard. I had just gotten off work, and he came inside complaining about his leg hurting. He said it burned, like he walked through the thistle or something, but it was in the negatives that week, and he had layers and boots on, so that was kind of impossible. My mum's a nurse, so she took a look, and there were 3 long scratches down the side of his calf. I was like, no way, and I asked to see his nails, and he had bitten them down to the core, so it definitely wasn't him. The dogs didn't leave a scratch mark like this, and neither did the cats, and again, he was wearing layers, so it just made no sense. He didn't believe me when I said it was a ghost. Personally, I thought whatever was in the home was getting him back for being such an ass, but that's neither here or there. I'm not sure if this connects too, but the downstairs had a sort of tunnel system in the wall that connected each and every cupboard in the basement. It was big enough at times for someone to crawl through, but you couldn't get into it because someone had blocked it off with wood. I actually found piles of empty baby jars in the tunnels, and I asked my mum what to do with them, and she said to just leave them there so we don't stir anything up. Another small note too is that my mum actually saged the house once a month so that whatever was in there would quiet down. But it just never seemed to stop the whole time that I lived there. I'm currently a 29-year-old guy living on the West Coast, and only recently have I taken an interest in anything paranormal again. I used to be very into the topic of ghosts when I was a kid. However, there was something that happened when I was 17 that scared me so badly that I steadfastly avoided anything paranormal for a long time. Until now, in fact. It's been 12 years since that day, and only now, after over a decade of no ghost sightings at all, do I feel like I can actually talk about it again. So when I was 17, I worked for a small business in a very small town of only a few thousand people in the Midwestern US. The business was on the town square, on the second floor of a 2-story brick building that was constructed close to 100 years ago. The bottom floor was a furniture store or something, and the only way to gain access to the second floor was past a dead-bolted glass door with a thick steel frame, and up a long straight flight of stairs. I taught self-defense classes part-time, which isn't a bad gig when you're just a teenager. But the head instructor lived over an hour away, so it was up to me to teach one night a week and occasionally open the place up for the night before anyone arrived for class. Additionally, I was also required to clean the building at least once a week on our off days, which wasn't difficult as I usually only had to run the vacuum and clean the windows and the mirrors and whatnot. Opening the front door required turning the key in a very, very old deadbolt lock, which would occasionally stick and would only open with a very loud clicking sound. Now one day, I stopped by work on an off day on the weekend with my girlfriend so we could clean the place, just so no one saw my car parked outside and assumed that there was a self-defense class being held that night. I locked the door from the inside by turning the deadbolt and loudly clicking it into place, before walking up the long flight of stairs. Working together, we vacuumed the floors and made quick work of the place. Because we were hormonally crazed teenagers that rarely had any quiet time alone, of course, we took a moment to get busy on the floor of the front office while we were there too. Unprofessional, I know, but it's not like anyone was there. But the town square was deserted outside since it was the weekend and all the businesses were closed. And besides, I made sure the front door was locked, and the only other person with a key to that particular lock was my boss, who wasn't even in the same town at the time. Afterwards, I walked to the bathroom, which was located in the back of the building, and on my way to the front of the building, while I was walking directly in the front of the stairs, I heard something. I heard a man's slow, heavy footsteps coming up the long flight of stairs at the front of the building. I'll admit that my first instinct was just to turn and run, since I was stark raving naked at the time and clearly wasn't expecting visitors. However, the second thought that I had was that this was completely impossible. I mean, I had locked the front door myself, and it was an old deadbolt that barely worked, I admit. But besides, I would have heard a loud resounding click if someone had unlocked the door. So, against my better judgment, my burning curiosity had me taking a step forward. I had to see what was making the sound. I just had to. If nothing else, simply looking down the empty flight of stairs and seeing nothing would help me understand that I had merely imagined the noise, and that of course there was nothing there to make it. However, as I thought of all of this, the footsteps continued, and continued to get louder as I walked closer to the noise. And then I saw it. It was a humanoid shadow. A solid, substantial shadow was climbing the stairs. This wasn't a shadow in the sense that somebody was blocking a light source or something and casting a flat shadow on a flat surface. It was more of a person. Imagine a shapeless or formless human cloaked in blackness. It had no hair, no facial features, no distinguishing characteristics of any kind, but was tall and broad-shouldered. Also, it was walking directly towards me. Its head appeared first, followed by its shoulders, and then its torso. Then, it was as if it just looked up and was surprised to see me. I looked at it exactly where its eyes should have been, and it looked back for less than a fraction of a second before it jerked backwards as if startled, and it just simply vanished, as if it had never even existed to begin with. I blinked several times and walked over to the top of the staircase and looked down the stairs, expecting to see someone somehow playing a trick on me or something, but when I did, there was nobody there. In fact, there was nothing there. And just as I had initially expected to see, before seeing the shadow that is, it was just an empty staircase, just as I thought it would be. I mean, after all, I had locked the front door myself, right? Immediately afterwards, I walked back to my girlfriend and we quickly got dressed and we just left. I didn't mention what I just saw to her, both because I didn't want to scare her and because I didn't think she would believe me anyway. I wrote off the entire incident as something that I just imagined, a bizarre hallucination of some sort. I mean, it couldn't have possibly happened, right? There was no one around outside the building since all the nearby businesses were closed. No one else had the key. And at first I thought that perhaps the shadow was just simply of someone passing by on the sidewalk downstairs. But the light from the front door only reached the bottom step of the stairs, and it wouldn't explain how the shadow was somehow getting closer to me, as well as somehow climbing the stairs. And well, I never saw the shadow again after that, but it didn't quite end there, because afterwards, I felt as though someone was watching me every single time I walked into that building. I would have to unlock the place before each class, and I would have to walk up the long stairway, in the pitch darkness, mind you, the same staircase that I saw the shadow on. I occasionally heard footsteps after that, and felt as if I was being followed as well. It was almost as if someone was just there, and someone unseen who really didn't like me as well. It almost felt like I just wasn't welcome anymore, and something wanted me to leave. Eventually, too, the feeling got so bad that I just didn't want to be alone in there anymore, and I brought my girlfriend with me a second time, and she later complained that she felt like someone was watching her. However, during the day, it just felt like a normal building. The oppressive, creepy feeling started around sunset and only got worse at night. Much worse. Around the time I graduated from high school, my boss decided the business was no longer profitable and chose to close the building down anyway. While it royally sucked to lose my only paying job, I was very glad to never have to set foot in that place ever again. About a year later, I was in a new relationship and I told my new girlfriend the story of all that I saw in my old job. She was curious, so one night I drove by and parked the car directly in front of the door. It had been quite some time since I was last there, so surely it was safe by now, right? But when I got close, I immediately felt like I was being watched. Whatever it was, it definitely had never left. It was like someone was just standing at the top of the stairs and was glaring downwards with such unbelievable hatred and malice that it was unbearable. My girlfriend immediately noticed it as well, and she really freaked out and demanded that I slam my foot on the gas pedal to get us out of there immediately. And of course, I did. Even to this day, over a decade later, I still don't feel comfortable driving past that building after dark when I fly home to visit my parents. I don't know what I saw there, but it's clearly rooted to that building, whatever it is, and either cannot or will not leave. Do any of you have any ideas about what it could have been? Maybe understanding it a little more will help me feel like I didn't lose my mind when I was a teenager. Anyway, thanks for listening. This incident that I'm sharing happened in October of 2018. I'm going to try my best to keep this as short as possible and try not to include useless details, but there's a lot to this entire story, so hang tight. My first semester of college was in the fall of 2018. I met this guy, Ron, through a friend of mine, and he seemed pretty cool. I also thought that he was cute, but I'd heard from other people around me that he had a girlfriend, so I wasn't flirting with him despite the initial attraction. I got put in a group chat with Ron and a couple of other people, and me and I started texting on occasion. Fast forward a few weeks though, and I'm walking back to my dorm from an event that my university hosted. It was around 10:30 at night. I'd been passively texting Ron that night because he missed the event and wanted to know what was going on, and I made a comment about how I wanted orange juice for some reason, probably because I always crave OJ, after 9 PM anyway. I got back to my building and he was standing outside of it. Now, I'd never told him where I lived, but the girl he was supposedly dating lived in a building connected to mine, so I didn't question it. I talked to him for a second and then walked up to my room where I had a window. and he was still standing outside, and I got a text from him saying that he was going to buy me some orange juice. So I opened the window and said it was a nice offer, but unnecessary. In response, he said something along the lines of, "I want to flirt with you. Am I allowed to do that?" I asked what he meant, and he said, "Well, you're cute. I want to flirt with you. Not in a weird way, but like in an encouraging way, like a gay best friend or something." And I said, sure? He asked if I could come down to talk, and since I was apparently stupid and naive, I did. And then he asked if we could go inside. I'd had male friends in my room before, and for some reason, I didn't see any red flags with Ron, so I said okay. We talked about multiple things, and all was normal at first. But things soon got pretty weird. You see, Ron was sitting at my desk, and out of his blue eyes just rolled into the back of his head. And then his voice changed. Like his accent changed from a regular American accent to Russian, I think. And then he started saying scary stuff like how he was trying to figure out what mask to put on around me and that he never talks in his real voice. He would also chuckle out of nowhere and then said that he was anti-Semitic and racist and hated everyone. He explained that being my gay best friend would mean that he would give me encouragement if I needed it, whether it's emotional or physical. He said, "And I'll give you hugs, but not in an affectionate way. Like this is affectionate." And he proceeded to wrap his arms around me in an iron grip and stare at me, unblinking. I said, "Okay, you can let me go." And when I moved, he didn't budge. So I said, "Dude, that's enough, stop." And he finally let go of me after I told him multiple times. But before he left my room, he said that he was in fact dating the girl that I'd mentioned, but that he would be hitting on me if he was single. He said that screwing friends isn't okay, but that he would screw me if I really needed it, because he apparently found me attractive. He also admitted that he had lied to a lot of people about his lineage. He told everyone that he was Slavic, but he grew up in my home state. He also had 3 different IDs in his wallet, all with different names. He would sometimes switch back to talking about normal stuff, like how he loves his girlfriend and classes, and then he would just switch back to that weird thing. On the way out of my room, once I stressed that he needed to leave, he said, "Hey, do you want to know how bad the locks are on your door?" I said no. He then asked if he was attractive and genuinely intimidated at this point. I said yeah. I know it's dumb, but I thought that if I said otherwise that he'd get angry and just go ballistic. I got him to leave and I closed the door. I looked at the people to watch him leave, but he stood outside of my door just staring at it for a good 5 to 10 seconds. I soon texted him and told him not to flirt with me because it made me uncomfortable, and he said, "Thanks for letting me know." So I figured I was in the clear at this point. After this, he started calling me multiple times each day at odd hours, like 3 in the morning. And he started showing up in a lot of the same places that I frequented. I started avoiding him because it was beginning to freak me out. I confided in Shane, the friend that introduced me to Ron, about what had happened and what had been going on. Once I told Shane about what was happening and about the things that Ron had said to me, he began to notice just how much Ron would appear wherever I was. Shane noticed him lurking outside of the entrance to our building that was closest to my room, the one on the back side of the building. He also noticed that Ron would stare me down in public settings and that he would move when he was sitting to be nearer to where I was. One day, Shane and I were sitting outside too, and Ron just started skating circles around me on his longboard, staring at me. The loop that he was taking was one of the bumpiest roads on the campus too, and Shane said that he was staring at me the whole time. Shane saw Ron eventually ride around the side of the building where the backside entrance was and hide around the corner. It was at this point too that Shane told me that I needed to report what was happening to my RA, but I honestly thought that I was overreacting to it all. Shane disagreed, but the weeks went on as normal. I slowly stopped seeing Ron around as much though, and I soon found out that Shane had gone to my RA himself and said what was going on, keeping my name out of it. My RA looked horrified and banned Ron from entering my building. I blocked his number to stop the 3 AM phone calls, and I eventually stopped seeing him around campus altogether. I know the ending is a bit anticlimactic, but everything leading up to Shane taking action was very peculiar and scary. I was worried Ron would break into my room, or worried that he would try to grab me one day, and worried about several other things that he said to me that I didn't detail in this story since they're all hard to discuss. Anyway, in the end there was definitely something wrong with Ron, but I hope that I never see him again. This is going to kind of be long, but hopefully it'll be interesting to somebody at least. I hate how much paranormal stuff is often faked. It takes all credibility away from the study of it. There are real things, though, that are unexplainable that I wish would be taken more seriously by science. And since I have first-hand accounts of something unexplainable, I feel I should at least share what I've experienced. I guess that I just think the more true information out there, the better. So some of this kind of gets a little, well, I guess I would say bigger than I ever expected. I'm agnostic and not very superstitious. I believe in ghosts, but I'm always questioning everything. Trust me, I don't blame anybody for not believing in this. But just a warning, some of this is going to sound, well, for a lack of a better term, made up. But I can assure you that it's 100% the truth. And this is the only paranormal stuff that's ever happened to me. Nothing before and nothing ever since. Okay, so senior year of high school, my friend and I got a Ouija board from Toys R Us. It was almost Halloween and we wanted to do something kind of creepy. We used it a few times and it worked on and off. Sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't, but when it would work, it would answer questions like knowing our family members' names and stuff like that. We thought it was pretty cool, but I now realize that it could have just been our subconscious moving it or something. I don't trust any answer if a person on the board knows the answer as well. I mean, I've seen a scientific study on it, and it is totally a thing. A little detour as well, but basically a group of people in the study used a Ouija board and it was answering questions and working great. They then blindfolded everyone and all the Ouija board spelt was absolute nonsense. While I do believe the board answers on its own, I think that some answers can sometimes be filled in by someone's subconscious if there isn't a good connection. But anyway, we thought it was cool still and we told our friends. One of our friends wanted to try it in a cemetery and we were down. So a few nights later, around 11 or midnight, the three of us went to a cemetery. As we used it, it seemed as though there were little noises like rustling and little twigs snapping just all around us. We'd take little breaks from it and the noises would stop, and once we put our hands back on, the sounds would start up again. The sounds may have very well been just coincidental, but we were creeped out nonetheless. At one point, when I looked in the direction of a sound, I could have sworn too that I saw a dark figure, about 4 feet tall, dart behind a tombstone in the distance. It was dark, so I really don't know, but I was creeped out and my eyes may have been playing tricks on me. Who knows? We then left the cemetery and headed to a park next to an orchard. We started using it again and we're hearing the same kind of noises though. This was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure there was a sound of something running towards us from the orchard as well. I kind of remember it, but my friend remembers it really well apparently. But we kept talking to it though, and all of a sudden it started answering every question with just fire. And no matter what we asked, it was always fire. We were asking, are you talking about hell? Did you die in fire? Am I going to die in fire? But still, all it would say is fire. I think it just kind of stopped working after that, and it started spelling nonsense and moving really slow. So we then just packed up and we headed home. Now, I dropped off one of my friends at his house and was driving to my other friend's house to drop him off as well. And I know that this is going to sound a little bit unbelievable, but in the distance, way down the road, we saw a light. But we didn't know what it was, but as I drove closer, we realized that it was a car on fire, parked on the side of the road. And we could hardly believe it. It was just sitting there in flames, and I still ask him to this day, that really happened, right? It was in the local newspaper the next week as well, and it said that there were no signs of theft and that it was probably vandalism. I'm not going to say that the Ouija board definitely did it. It might have just been telling us that it happened. I don't know, but it was weird nonetheless. So anyways, we were in shock and I decided to hang with him a bit when we got to his house. We went upstairs to his room and we talked about it. At some point he went to the bathroom and when he came back, he closed the door to his bedroom and as he took one step away, there was a single bang on the door. He opened the door and nothing was there. We talked for a minute about this, but then started hearing clearly heavy steps walking up and down the hall outside of his room. We listened for a bit and then we opened the door and as we looked out, his mum was looking out of her bedroom too. She said that she had heard the same thing and I stayed for a while longer and then I just headed home. I eventually get home and maybe 20 minutes later, my friend calls in a panic and says that he felt a breath on the back of his neck. I wasn't there, so I don't know, but he seemed pretty legitimately terrified. I basically stayed on the phone with him until sunlight as well. Now, I'm not too sure how much later this next part happened. It was within the month, but another one of our friends really wanted to try the board. He couldn't believe everything we were saying, so we went out with him one night to the same park but a different area. It was a picnic table up on a hill. It was next to a waist-high fence blocking a 30-foot drop down to the orchard, and it immediately started working as soon as we touched it. We talked to it for a while. I don't really remember exactly what it was saying. Our friend was pretty shocked but still not convinced, and he then asked it to make a noise. I hate how cliche this is going to sound, but probably about 10 seconds after he asked, there was the sound of a little girl giggling in the orchard. It was a high-pitched little giggle that went for maybe 2 seconds. We all heard it clear as day as well, and none of us could believe it. Our friend kept saying, "There's no way, there's just no way." We started to talk to it again, and he asked it to make another noise. Pretty soon after that, there was a slow cracking sound coming from the orchard. It was basically the sound of a large branch slowly cracking and falling off of a tree. We could also hear the other tiny branches and leaves rustling around it as it fell. I don't remember if we heard the thud of it landing though, but it was super clear though, and we were definitely in shock. I mean, it was pretty much unbelievable that this was happening. We talked about it for a bit, and then our friend asked it to make another noise. And this time, there was a single high-pitched little beep on the other side of us. It was only half a second, but it was super loud and we definitely all heard it. I think it just stopped working after a while, so we eventually just packed it up and we left. And this part pisses me off. I haven't talked to our friend who was there in years, but somebody I know said that they had recently talked to him about it. He remembers all of it, but he won't even consider the chance of it being possibly paranormal. He thinks that it's all just coincidences. Anyway, another one of our friends still wasn't believing us. We used it one time in the park with him and someone else too, but it wasn't that great. It just wasn't very responsive or something those 2 times. We asked it to make a noise and nothing happened, and it just wasn't happening, so eventually we gave up. But then, maybe a few weeks later, we went up to this guy's cabin with some friends to get drunk. A few friends had supposedly seen a shadow figure there, so we thought, hey, why not? Let's bring the Ouija board out. We get super drunk and then we pull it out. One of our friends who doesn't believe it gets on the board. He started asking it some questions about family names and stuff like that. It's answering some correctly and others are just nonsense. He's completely wasted at this point. He starts calling it every bad word you can think of. He's just being an idiot, basically, and trying to be funny. He keeps cussing at it and putting it down. He kept yelling, "Prove you're real. Do something. Prove it, you pussy." He kept going like this for a while, too, and then he just packed it up and kept getting drunk and smoking cigarettes. Nothing really happened for the rest of the time that we were at the cabin as well. We might have used it in the morning or something. I don't really remember, but we drove back the next day, and when I got to my house, I went to my room and got to my computer. I was hooked on MySpace back then, and my friend who was yelling at the Ouija board and I actually had a little band page on MySpace. I clicked on our page, and the profile views had somehow changed to 666. For anybody who didn't have MySpace, MySpace would keep track of profile views and show a counter on your public profile and on your homepage as well. I logged into the band account, and on the homepage, there was still 800-something views like normal. I looked at the profile again, and there was still 666. No matter how many times I or anybody clicked on the page as well, it would stay at 666. In fact, it stayed like that for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, one day it just went back to normal. There's still comments on the profile where people are talking about it. Everybody was a little bit creeped out by it. But after that, we didn't use the board for a few years. We let somebody borrow it at some stage, and then we just stopped hanging out with them, so we just never got it back. We didn't really care, though. I mean, we just didn't feel like using it anymore after all of these experiences anyway. Now, a few years later, I was sharing a house with my friend, and it was almost Halloween, and we had some friends over. We were all getting drunk and talking about our Ouija board experiences. We were talking about how we should have gotten the board back. I told them how my mum used to make her own when she was a kid, and that you can make them out of literally nothing. My mum always told me, too, to never use a Ouija board. She had some bad experiences when she was a kid and knew that it was very real and very dangerous. And honestly, these stories and warnings only made me want to use it more. So, a quick story about her as well that's pretty crazy. She and her sister were using it at her aunt and uncle's place. There was a phone call, so her aunt left the room to go and answer the phone. My mum asked the board who's on the phone, and it started moving to a bunch of just different numbers. Her aunt hangs up and comes back into the room. Her uncle asked who was on the phone. I don't remember exactly what it was, but basically there was a mix-up with someone's flight. She maybe said something about the flight number and some other numbers, and long story short, all the numbers matched up with the board. Her uncle, who was also very religious, didn't like that. Up until then, he had only thought it was a little trick or a game. He began asking it questions and mentioning God, and the board began saying vulgar things to them. He grabbed the Bible and started reading scripture to it. I don't know how long this went on, but the board ended up telling him that it was going to kill him. They asked how, and it responded car. I think it was 2 weeks later, too, that he was driving somewhere and got into a really bad car accident that left him in a critical condition. Some older women in my family, like my mum's grandma or her great aunt or something, told my mum once that she sensed something with her, and she said that my mum was like her and had a gift. My mum has said that she sometimes gets weird feelings, like someone's there, but nothing too crazy. She's not seeing and hearing ghosts all the time or anything like that. I was thinking if maybe this is possibly why my Ouija board experiences were as crazy as they were. Again, I don't know, but it's a hypothesis. I'm definitely not thinking I'm psychic or anything. I've never felt anything like that. All I'm saying is that maybe I just inherited enough of it to make the Ouija board do crazy things. I don't know. Maybe none of that is real, but it's just something I was told. I have no idea. It all sounds a bit crazy to me, and I feel a bit embarrassed even saying it. But anyway, back to the story now. So me and my friends were all drunk at our house. I made a Ouija board out of a 30-pack box and a shot glass. My two friends started using the board, but it was hardly working. I then sat down to give it a try, and as soon as we asked it a question, it worked. It was moving at a decent speed, and I used it for a bit, and then my friend swapped in. The board was still working for them, and it told them its name was Agatha. It kept working for the next half hour or so as well, and then we stopped. We used it one more night after that with somebody else, and it worked again. I don't remember anything interesting happening that night, but some time passes, and me and my friend are sitting on the couch one day. We're watching TV, and we start hearing those heavy footsteps again from upstairs. We just sat there, terrified, as we listened. But they were just walking up and down the hall for some reason, and they stopped, and we went and looked, but nothing was there. Another time, we were sitting on the back deck. There was a door about 20 feet from the chairs. It led to this little side room, and all of a sudden, there were several quick knocks coming from that door. Again, we just froze and stared in shock. I had crazy goosebumps at that point, and my eyes were watering, and I wasn't about to cry, but that's just for some reason my natural ghost reaction. Even sometimes if I'm just hearing a ghost story from a coworker or a friend that I trust, I get goosebumps. I don't know why. I don't think it's an energy thing or anything like that. I've never felt the electrical energy that they describe. I think I'm just creeped out by it all a lot. And for some reason, it only happens with the paranormal. I don't know, but it's just a different kind of fear or something. Anyways, another time we had a few other people over and we were all drinking down in the basement. There was a flimsy metal door that led outside, the kind that lifts up from the ground. We were drinking and listening to music when all of a sudden, something started banging really loudly on the metal door. It probably banged about 4 or 5 quick times. We all froze and looked at each other and we turned off the music. I walked up the stairs and pushed open the metal door and nobody was there. We obviously looked around, but there was nothing there. We lived way out in the country, so we kinda already knew what it was, right when it happened. But a few weeks later, I was sitting in my room and there was an empty cereal bowl sitting in front of me on my desk. I was looking at my laptop and in the corner of my eye, I saw the handle of the spoon lift up about 1 centimeter and then flick 2 inches along the side of the bowl. It was a ceramic bowl, so it made the little click sound, and I definitely heard that. Another time one night, I was at my parents' house. My roommate and I were in a band, and a lot of my recording stuff, like my computer, was still there. I was working on something, and all of a sudden I heard a cat start yowling. It sounded exactly like one of our old cats, and it was really slow and drawn out. But the weird thing is that it sounded like it was coming from our attic. I walk into my closet, where I have a little push-up opening onto the ceiling, where you can get into the attic. I would blow smoke up into it when I was smoking weed in my room, so it was already open. And the yowling didn't stop. I stared up at the hole, and it sounded like the cat was right up there above me. I called the cat's name a few times because I didn't think it was anything weird. I just thought our cat somehow got trapped in the attic when all of a sudden the yowl just started to change. It slowly started morphing into a voice of an old woman. With each yowl, it slowly started sounding more and more like "help me." It was at the same exact pace as the yowls, same pitch and everything, and it just took on a human voice. It was weird and really creepy living it. I just kind of stared up at the noise and I was definitely freaked out, but I almost didn't believe it at the same time. And eventually I just walked away and closed the closet door, and I sat down at my desk and basically just tried to pretend that it never happened. I was definitely scared, but I didn't want to show it. My friend and I continued to hear footsteps and other forms of movement too, on and off throughout our time at that house. And the only time that I ever definitely saw something was at that house. So, I was the only one home and I was recording something on piano. I was sitting, staring forward, listening to the playback, when very quickly, a shadow of a person darted across the wall right in front of me. It's hard to explain, but it was the exact same way the shadow would have looked if my roommate were to have run up the stairs. I knew it was around the time that he'd be getting home, so I thought nothing of it and thought it must have been him. I took off my headphones and walked into the living room, and I didn't hear my roommate moving around upstairs. So I looked out the window and his car wasn't there. And that definitely freaked me the hell out. And then, just about 2 minutes later, I saw his headlights coming down the driveway. A few weeks later, I was using my Tascam 24 Neo. I think that's what it was called. It was a multi-track music recorder anyway, and I hooked it up to my computer to transfer some songs. We had just recorded some new stuff, and we were going to put it online. We hadn't released anything, in quite a while, in fact. We were really proud of these songs, though, and had worked pretty hard on the recordings. And in the middle of exporting a song onto the computer, my recorder froze up. I couldn't get it to do anything, and it was just stuck on the screen, so I shut it off and turned it back on. Same exact thing, though, and I don't remember what the screen was, but I think it was maybe just some technical stuff that I didn't understand. So, I was in a horrible mood and had to go to work. I didn't say anything about it to anybody, and all of a sudden the girl that I'm working with starts saying that she's hearing little noises every once in a while. I start paying closer attention and start hearing a few as well. We were standing in the back kitchen and we were just talking about it when, all of a sudden, the door handle to the back door just starts jiggling. Just a light jiggle at first, kind of like someone was trying to open it, but it's locked. She got pretty freaked out, and I opened the door and the screen door on the outside was locked, and there was nobody there. At the time, I told her that I didn't know what was going on. I didn't feel like saying anything about the Ouija board, but we then heard the door to the bathroom up front lightly close. I went and looked, and there was nobody in the store. Everything died down eventually, and I headed home after work soon after. I was driving down our long driveway when, in my headlights, I see my roommate parked on the side of the driveway, maybe 200 feet from the house. I drive past him, and then he starts his car and meets me at the house. He said about 5 minutes earlier, all the electrical and the lights were freaking out in the house. They were flashing and stuff, and I walked in and it all seemed normal to me. Some lights and stuff were still flickering every once in a while, but it had definitely calmed down at this point. Nothing really crazy happens for a while after that, but I sent my recorder into Tascam, the manufacturer, to get it fixed. They kept it for probably 2 months, possibly more. I kept talking to them and calling, but they just couldn't figure it out. They kept trying test after test, and nothing seemed to work. They said that they'd never seen anything like it before, and it ends up that they just couldn't save it, and everything that was recorded on it as well. I actually had 2 years worth of song ideas and recordings on there, and it was just all gone, and nobody knew how, and it really sucked. After that, I looked up some way to get rid of the Ouija board curse, and I don't remember what it was exactly, but we just cut it into pieces and buried it or something. I don't know if that was the right thing to do or not, but I haven't had anything paranormal happen to me since then, so for that, I'm grateful. Back in autumn of 2010, in my early 20s, I was back at my parents' house, bored, enjoying life with pretty much no responsibilities, waiting for my school program to start in late November. All my friends and brothers were busy either with work or school, so I was looking for some sort of a job that I can do for maybe a month or so, full-time, and maybe continue part-time when I start school. Mind you, this is in Quebec, Canada, late September. Beautiful, by the way, and it's already getting pretty cold. My younger brother calls me and tells me that he has given my number to someone who is recruiting people for someone else. No big deal. The guy calls me, though, and tells me that he's looking for people to work for his new company of cleaning services, housekeeping, that has this contract with the YMCA all over the province, and that will be paid $25 an hour cash under the table, meaning undeclared, for basically cleaning up YMCAs, and that no professional training was needed for this job. Now, I may have been young at the time, but I was not stupid. There is no job that pays $25 an hour cash, undeclared money for housekeeping, because even the professionals who clean up hospitals start at around $19 an hour, and that's before taxes. So whoever would pay cash for housekeeping would pay maybe $12 an hour, maximum $15 an hour, and even that would be too generous. Right away my curiosity is piqued though, and I have to know what's going on and what this job is really about. We set up a meeting for the next day evening at 5 p.m. He tells me that he'll come pick me up and take me to his boss. I give him an address in my neighborhood, but not where I live. The next day, I dress professionally like someone going for a job interview. I put on a nice autumn coat, and underneath my right arm sleeve, I put on a huge sharp knife that can easily kill someone if stabbed at the right spot. Because of past experiences from childhood, I've learned that humans can be really dangerous, and so I never trust a stranger. That's a story for another time, though. So I go to meet him, and he's already there. His car is normal, nothing special about it. I get in the back seat as there's somebody already in the front seat. But the first thing that hits me is the smell of just dried blood. The smell of dried blood is a distinct smell that you can't forget. Like the smell of fresh blood, that metallic smell, unforgettable, and, again, past experiences from childhood. I get in the car all jovial and courteous, but then I notice that there are actually 3 in the car. The driver, the guy who I've been talking to, is a huge white guy, at least 6'5" tall, fat, in his early 40s. He's not the kind of fat that is obese though, but the kind of fat you know used to be into sports, football, or bodybuilding when he was younger, or something like that. And he has a coat on, and sitting in the passenger seat next to him is this old-looking white female, the kind that looks old but is actually not that old. A chain smoker probably, and drinks, and not yet 50 years old. I'm sitting right behind her, and sitting in the back seat next to me, right behind the driver, is this young black male. Definitely older than me, but not yet in his 30s. And he smells like beer and looks like he's a bit high or something. Oddly enough, even in this weather, this guy only has a black t-shirt on and blue jeans. Now, my knife can easily go down from my sleeve into my hand. I calculate that if something happens, I can quickly stab the huge driver in the neck. The drunk guy wasn't going to be much of a problem unless he had a knife or something on him, and the old lady is not even in the equation. I can tell that they're not prepared for someone like me, or so I thought at least. I'm confident and engage in the conversation to try to know these people. I ask if the two work for him or are going to the interview too, and he says no, that they're his friends, which was strange too because these people look like they could have used a $25 per hour cash-paying job. They don't talk much, if at all, and he tries to make me feel more comfortable and at ease by asking me questions about what I do, what I study. I tell him that I'm into computers, that I sometimes buy used computers and laptops and repair them and resell them. He then tells me that he has a computer to sell at his house and that if I want, we can go to his place and see the computer before going to see the boss. So I tell him that I don't mind. It's mostly silent all the time. All along the black guy in the back seat is making strange sounds though, talking to himself I think. Almost inaudibly low and laughing to himself as well, really low as if to warn me or something. That I'm too naive. The whole trip though is definitely eerie. The silence, the smell, the huge driver, the old lady, the strange black guy. I'm pretty big on vibes, and this is the most uneasy and strange and weird vibe that I've ever felt. At this point, my intuition is telling me the obvious. This is not a ride to a job interview. And slowly, my confidence is going down as the sun is setting. It's almost 6 now, and we're at his duplex. I get out of the car, and he gets out too. The lady and the black guy stay in the car, and I come face to face with him. That's when I see how huge this guy really is, and I'm not short. I'm 6 foot and 220 pounds at this point. I have a pretty good build, but this guy is way taller than me, and I know immediately that in a fight, face to face, me against him, with a knife, I would have an advantage over him, but it would take more than one stab wound to stop this guy. This guy could definitely kill me just by hugging me too tight. He comes closer to me, talking straight to me as if to size me up. He turns and he takes me to his basement house. Strange. He lives with his parents and his brother, or so he says, as these people look nothing like him. These people look inbred a little bit if anything, like the people in the hills have eyes. The house is modest though, and he shows me the computer that he wants to sell, an old computer that nobody in their right mind would want to buy. The price is low, and his so-called brother, who is mentally disabled by the way, comes into the living room screaming that the computer is not for sale. He tells me not to mind his brother, that he's sick. I tell him that I'll think about it, and he tells me to go and wait for him outside. I go out and call my girlfriend and tell her everything. I'm walking further from the car and coming back towards the car, to and fro, so they don't hear what I'm saying. I'm smoking my cigarette, I look calm, laughing as I'm trying to convince my girl that it's not that bad. I'm lying. The whole thing was really strange. I know for a fact that my storytelling and description of the situation doesn't do it justice. Of course, she's begging me to get away from them as quickly as possible. I give her the car plate number and promise her that the next weird thing that happens, I'm out of there. He gets back in the car while I'm tranquil finishing my cigarette. I'm playing it cool, but inside I was getting pretty scared. I get back in the car and it's almost night now. We take the road and it's still extremely silent in the car besides the little noises the black guy would do really. It's night now and I see that we're taking the route to go out of the city. I ask him about it, and he tells me that the boss lives 30 minutes from the city in a mansion. And no mansion-owning boss brings you to his mansion for an interview for housekeeping in the night. I start getting pretty creeped out at this point. Outside of the city, in the woods, it's really dark, and maybe no cell phone service too. Maybe more people there waiting for me, who knows. As we're about to take the highway, the driver sees someone that he knows. He says to his friends, "Isn't that Mark?" And the black guy says yes. The driver opens the windows and calls the guy, and tells the black guy, "Go and get him." The black guy goes out to get him. I look in the back, and they were behind the car, and I see the black guy talking to a bum. I'm not even joking. This was a street bum, a fat, dirty-looking homeless guy. He's bringing him to the car, though, and now I calculate quickly. Me, squeezed in the back seat, with a bum next to me, limited movement, 4 people trying to tranquilize me. I don't know if they have a tranquilizer or a knife, a gun, but the chances of me getting out of this situation unharmed are definitely slowly diminishing, which means that this is my last chance to get out. I try to open the door and realize that it's locked. I try to unlock it, but I can't. Strange too, because when the black guy went out, his door wasn't locked. I ask the driver to open the door so that I can go outside for a cigarette. He tells me that it's okay, that I can smoke inside the car. I tell him that I'd rather smoke outside, so he unlocks the door, and I go out and feel really relieved. So relieved, in fact, that to this day, I thank God for this opportunity, even though I'm not a religious person. I light my cigarette and smile. It's completely dark now. It's cold on a busy street, but I feel a lot safer. The bum and the black guy get into the car, and I tell the driver that I have somewhere to be, which was true, and that I'll have to reschedule the interview. Right away, the black guy takes my place in the back. He was in the middle seat in the back, waiting for me to get back into the car, and closes the door as if satisfied with my decision. I lean on the passenger side window, the old-looking woman's seat, to talk to the driver, so she's in between me and the driver. He's telling me that they can take me wherever I want to go, and we'll go see the boss later, blah blah blah, when the woman leans towards underneath her seat, as if to take something from her purse, and quickly he puts his hand on her leg as if to stop her. She slowly sits straight again, and I see everything. I smile at them, I back up, get away from her window, and continue calmly smoking my cigarette on the pavement, enjoying the cold autumn air while he's begging, telling me to come back into the car, and that if he doesn't bring a potential worker tonight, that the boss will get really mad. For a $25 an hour job, you don't need to beg anybody. I mean, how many jobs would pay that amount without requesting any qualifications, right? I tell him that I'll just call him. I have further plans for these guys, and then I just leave. I'm far away from my parents' house. I'm completely at the other side of town. I walk for a little bit and make sure that they're not following me. I see a bus and I hop in and I go about my business. I get home around 10 p.m. The driver is still texting me, telling me that the boss is still willing to meet me, mind you, at this late hour. I tell him that I'll just call him back, and I call my friends and tell them the story about what happened. I want to go back. I'm willing to go back into the car and go meet this boss outside the city, as long as some of my friends and brothers are in the car behind following us, armed and ready for whatever. Back in our teens, we would have done this with pleasure. But these days, my friends have responsibilities. One has a family too. The others have jobs to go to in the morning, so only one of my friends is willing to come. So in the end, we just let it go, like cowards. I still regret that, because I would have loved to have caught them in the act and got them in trouble with the cops or something. In the end, I didn't call the police either, because I didn't know what to tell them. I grew up being taught not to trust the cops or call them for anything pretty much. That was stupid, I know. And the guy just never called me again. To this day, I still wonder where they wanted to actually take me, what they wanted to do with me, and who this boss actually was that they wanted to take me to. These people did not look like low-level workers, and if anybody has any idea, please feel free to tell me your opinion. One thing that I'm sure of, though, is that there was definitely no $25 an hour cash-paying job waiting for me where I was going. So, this was probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, pegging my age around 16 or 17, I think, in Ohio. I went to school around the supposedly haunted Gore Orphanage Road, and us stupid high schoolers, knowing this, obviously decided that it would be fun to go adventure seeking, even with the road being illegal to drive down from dusk till dawn due to drug activity. But I'll tell you this much, I never went back after this, and I don't plan on doing it in the future either. So, if you haven't heard of it, the legend goes like this. There was an orphanage called Gore Orphanage in the Amherst, Ohio area where there was a fire and all of the children and caretaker were killed. I'm recalling all of this by memory as I actually happened to do a research paper on the place one year, but I'm sure I'm missing a few of the details. But one thing that became clear though was that during my research, the legend is complete BS. Now, it's a Friday night and somewhere during football season. I'm thinking it was October maybe, as me and a large group of friends decided to head into a nearby town to get a late night dinner. From there, we just kind of bullcrapped around school, this and that, etc. Before three of my friends, a guy and two girls, who I won't be naming, got onto the subject of Gore Orphanage. And stupidly, we all decided to go at around midnight. So we drove out to where the road starts. It goes downhill into a marsh-like area where there's an actual gate that was supposed to be closed. Didn't think anything of it at the time because I'd been down there a few times myself and it was never really closed, not even after dark. We make our way down this hill though, messing with each other in the car, trying to scare one another. My male friend is driving his car and I'm in the passenger seat and both the females are in the back. The road, down by the marsh area, curves to the right, whereupon a little ways forward, there's a one-vehicle bridge. I remember it too because of the copious amounts of graffiti on the metal and guardrails and a sign at the far end of the bridge. I can't remember for the life of me, though, what kind of sign it was. So, on the other side of the bridge is a little turnaround point. The road dead ends a little ways past this point, but on the right side of the road is where the trail starts. The trail to the supposed Gore Orphanage ruins. We briefly, and I mean briefly, discussed parking the car and going down the trail, but screw that, right? But instead of turning around there, we decided to go all the way to the end of the road to the actual turnaround. Here, the driver put the car in park, shut off the engine, and extinguished the headlights. It was all just stupid harmless fun, us scaring the girls. We sat there for about 5 minutes before we decided that we'd had our fun and it was time to go home. The car comes back on, the light goes on, we put it into drive and we were off back on the road. The thing seemed unchanged until we got close to where the trail started. On the left side of the car at the turnaround was a truck parked, engine off. I thought to myself, where the hell did that come from? All of us were on edge a bit now, and my friend driving just sat there a few feet back from the truck with his foot on the brake. He was convinced that it was just another group of idiots like us that gave in to the idea of going down the trail. Obviously, I didn't give a crap to find out and told him to just get us out of there. But this is where it gets absolutely insane. So we drive forward at a calm speed, passing up the truck and making the slight turn left into the little bridge. And chilling right there on the bridge are 10 or 12 individuals tattered in robes of various colours, some hooded, some not, and the faces of the unhooded ones were covered in crappy tattoos or dirt or something and had nasty beards and whatnot. And even worse, they were brandishing shotguns and hunting rifles, just staring at us as we came into view. At this point, I'm mortified thinking, holy crap, we're about to die. The girls are absolutely flipping, but what my friend driving did, I will forever be grateful for. As stupid as we'd been up to this point, to even find out ourselves in this situation that we were currently in. I'm glad that immediately upon catching sight of the Pope's hunting trip, he just gunned it, not even thinking about the possibility of hitting one of them. We sped past them and along the marshlands, now to the right of us, before flying up the hill back into the main road. None of us could believe what we had just seen. It honestly felt like I was in a Stephen King novel. We joked about it afterwards, surprisingly, probably just to try and lighten the mood since we almost died. And we thought that that was it. But no. So I get home about 15 minutes away after all of that. I know, pretty terrifying to know that you live so close. And for obvious reasons, I just can't sleep. So I stay up pretty much all night doing whatever it is that I did at that age. Played video games or watched TV maybe. But it's about 5:30 in the morning when my dad comes home from work. He's a state trooper and patrols the local area from time to time, but to this day I'm still a little confused as to why he asked me about this. As if he physically knew that I felt like being an idiot that night, but he asks me, "Were you down by Gore Orphanage Road tonight?" Thinking that he'd get pretty pissed at me if I said yes. I lied and said no. Why? He started taking his bulletproof vest off and his gun belt off before telling me, "Yeah, we got a weird call about some satanic crap, like chanting and fire down in the woods from Mr. S." I asked him if he went down there, to which he replied that he did, with his cruiser shining a spotlight into the woods. And there was apparently nothing. Mr. S was the father of my friend in the driver's seat that night. I started to think that he told him what happened, but I later decided that this may not have been the case for two reasons. One, I don't know why he would have said anything to his dad about fire and satanic chanting. Didn't see any of that. And two, they live literally a 5-minute walk from that area, and he might have been able to see and hear these things, so maybe it was just a coincidence. But nonetheless, everything went on as normal from then on out for me and the two girls. However, my friend who lives nearby began to be stalked by people who kept showing up in his front lawn, staring at his house every couple of nights. They would always spray paint things on trees in the front yard too, but he never discussed it with me, what they sprayed on the trees, so it beats me what it is. Thankfully, this stopped after about 2 or 3 weeks as law enforcement started hanging out more. And as curious as I still am about what they were doing down there, I think it's better that I just don't know. Whether they were worshipping Satan, or sacrificing a goat, or perhaps cooking crystal meth, I'm just glad that my friend's car interior didn't get a makeover consisting of pieces of my brain. This story takes place when I was about 17 in a small border town that I grew up in. I lived in a house on a very steep hill, and I took the bus every morning and after school to come home as well. The class started very early and no other students lived on my small street. It must have been during the winter because I was pretty cold every morning, which isn't a usual thing where I lived. So, I remember being afraid every morning because it was very dark outside and I only had the light of the moon to guide me, and back then cell phones didn't have flashlights that you can use to guide your way in the dark. There were only 3 other houses on a small street, and they were all on a big hill with a paved driveway going down and meeting a gravel road. The houses were arranged around a gravel cul-de-sac, which many people used to turn around if they went down the wrong road. I live in a desert area too, so there were leafless mesquite trees and cactuses around where it was very reminiscent of a forest or dense flora area. It was so quiet that all you can hear were the bats fluttering around the one streetlight that decided to work on the off day. But usually it was just pitch black and pitch quiet. And along with the occasional yapping of coyotes and crickets chirping, other than that, all I could hear was the crunching of the gravel beneath my feet. So the first time I saw the man in a van, I wasn't that surprised. A lot of the time, we would just get used to these white vans passing through because they delivered the papers to the surrounding houses. But I then started to realize pretty quickly that this van would stop right next to me when I was standing alone waiting for the bus to arrive. There was a stop sign there, but there was no reason for the person in the van to be stopped there for 10 minutes until the bus picked me up. He must have started to get brave too after that, because he would roll down his window and ask me if I was cold. I'd say yes and ignore his presence and pretend like nothing happened. I just figured that he was trying to be nice to me. He was an older Hispanic man in his late 70s, after all. Again, the next day, he pulls up even closer to me this time and says, "Are you cold? You look beautiful today, but you look so cold." This time I just ignored him and waited for the bus to pull up, and I got in. I would watch this van pull away after my bus left too. He kept doing this for 2 weeks too, until one day, he looked at me through his window and said, "I could use a pretty girl like you. It's cold outside. You must be so cold. Come inside my van and I'll keep you warm until your bus gets here." I looked at him in horror, and luckily, the bus pulled up a few seconds later, and I decided that, at this point, I needed to tell someone about him. My dad is in law enforcement, and I told my dad what had been happening. He asked me what he looked like, and when the van would pull up, and he said that I should have told him sooner, but he's glad that I told him when I did. He called the police, and I told the police what had been happening. They said that they had similar reports in the area and that they would catch him. The next day, the police hid behind me, where the cul-de-sac is, and I stood in my usual spot where I stood for the bus. I remember that day the streetlight was finally working, and I could see the man's face in the van. And he didn't realize the officer was there until he made a full turn around the cul-de-sac and started towards me when the police turned their lights on and pulled him over. I could hear him yelling as the bus pulled in and I left for school, and I could see the police lights glaring on the bus windows. But the next day, my dad sat me down and told me that he had to talk to me, because apparently the man had many suspicious things in his van. He apparently had duct tape, plastic bags, zip ties, condoms, lube, black trash bags, a machete, and some other strange things. He claimed to be a newspaper man and said that he was distributing newspapers to my neighborhood, but the police never even found one newspaper in his van when they had searched it. My dad ran a background check on him, and he had a really seedy past. I'm not sure whatever happened to that man legally, but he never showed his face on the street again. But whenever I stood there at the end of the street, all I could think about is that if he had gotten the courage to step out of his van, that I would have had no way to have defended myself, and no one would have ever heard from me again. Two years ago, I moved out into rural Indiana with some of my best friends to share a pretty large apartment that was above my best buddy's dad's garage. Since most of my family is from that area, most of them have known about the house their whole life, and all of them pretty much unanimously agreed that it was haunted. Before my friend's dad moved in, the place had actually been a church. One wing was the actual chapel, and the other was living quarters. My mum said that multiple exorcisms had been done there, and she once watched the double doors to the living quarters fly open and something stomped down some stairs, all during an exorcism. Hell, even when I got there, my other friend that I was living with showed me the unused concrete basement, and in there was a room that seemed to serve no purpose whatsoever, bigger than a closet but smaller than a typical room. And the only thing in the room was a symbol painted on the middle of the wall that gave us really bad vibes. We googled it actually, and it turned out to be a symbol that represented some demon who preferred taking children's souls or some crap like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. Anyway, it's 1 AM and all of my roommates are asleep, and I decided that I'm going to go outside and smoke something and look at the moon and listen to some Radiohead to relax myself after work. Usually I take our pitbull pup, Sweetie, with me and go around the back of the garage towards the forest. Sweetie is so well trained that she'll just stick with you without a leash and typically scares off packs of coyotes that lurk around. However, as I'm walking towards the forest, Sweetie stops and starts whining and won't follow me like she usually does, so I tell her to come on, but she just refuses to go. I take her back to the apartment and have her sit on my bed, and she's shaking at this point, but stupid me decided that it was okay and went back around to the garage outside and started walking towards the forest again. But this time, I noticed something was walking alongside of me, pretty much directly next to me, in my peripheral. I just kept going until something just clicked in my head that said, "You didn't imagine that," and I turned to see what it was next to me, and It was a white figure that was as tall as my waist, and it was wearing a dress, and then something whispered in my ear, and I just took off running at this point into the huge backyard area where I usually smoke. After smoking for a bit and listening to In the Rainbows for the 1000th time in my life to calm me down, I decided that I must have just imagined it, and Sweetie probably just saw a coyote that was bigger than usual or something like that. So I decided that I'm done and I'm just ready for bed, and I'd pretty much forgotten about the white figure, so I'll head back the way that I came since it's the faster way back to the apartment. And this is where most people don't believe me. So I started walking into the huge open area that was the forest behind it, and I saw something running in the darkness. The curious me kept watching to see what it was, and I could make out 2 legs and that it was pretty large, but it was sprinting really fast. I watched it for a little bit until I noticed that this large hulking shadow person thing was full on sprinting towards me though, and beginning to show itself in the moonlight. And it was at this point that I just booked it. But I could hear something following me all the way back until I got to our door. My friends have told me some of their stories too, but no one believes the last part of mine. But I know what I saw, and I know that it was real. I wasn't tired, and I wasn't imagining things, and I've never had this happen to me in the past or since then, and whatever it was weird, and it actually happened. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out... G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and before the video begins, I would like to give Audible another big shout out for sponsoring this video. So, if you're unaware of what Audible actually is, it's basically a huge online library of audio originals, because you can go back and re-listen anytime, even if you cancel your membership. And the cool thing is that your free audiobook for the month can actually be of any value, even if it's of higher value than the membership price, which is about $15 a month, and means that you can save a ton of money. It also means that you have literally nothing to lose and everything to gain by signing up. You can also listen anywhere, anytime, on any device, enjoy easy audiobook exchanges, and even roll over credits. So, all you have to do to start listening and capitalize on this excellent offer, guys, is go to audible.com/bbuster or text bbuster to 500 to get a free audiobook, 2 free Audible originals, and a 30-day free trial. That's audible.com/BEBUSTA or text BEBUSTA to 500 to get a free audiobook, 2 free Audible originals, and a 30-day free trial. I hope you guys take up Audible's generous offer, and without further ado, let's begin. Last Thanksgiving, I was driving home from college with my friend, both 21 and female at the time. I live in a very isolated part of Arkansas that requires driving through an hour of hairpin turns in the mountains. There are lots of blind spots, and the whole time you're driving on the edge of just huge drop-offs with no barriers. I'm usually pretty confident driving through the mountains, but we were in my friend's car, so I was going slower than usual, driving about 5 over the speed limit. So, almost as soon as we started the roughest part of the drive, another car was tailgating us pretty close. This was stressing me out, and as soon as I saw somewhere that I could pull over, I did. I pulled into a church parking lot, and my friend offered to drive the rest of the way, but I declined as it was completely dark and she had never driven this route before. We got back on our way though, and a few minutes later, I have to come to a screeching halt as there's a car stopped in the middle of the road. It wasn't on the shoulder at all, but just stopped dead in the middle of the road. My friend is saying that they must have broken down, but can't call a tow because there's no service in this area. I, on the other hand, immediately have a bad feeling and lock the doors. I tell my friend to stay in the car no matter what, as she's starting to get scared at this point and points out that she thinks it was the car that was following us. I can't tell, but I'm pretty scared at this point. It's parked right before a hairpin turn too, so I can't pass it. My friend starts frantically telling me to go ahead and pass it, but I don't want to get hit by a Mack truck or fall off the mountain or something. So I honk my horn. Nothing happens. No chance of calling for help as there's no cell service, like I said. So we just wait there for a while, doing nothing. My friend is crying and freaking out, but I'm too scared to try and pass them. I honk a couple of times, and eventually, a guy gets out of the car, comes around back, and leans against his car, just staring at us. My friend is freaking out even more, and I'm just frozen. I tell her not to make eye contact. I'm ready to floor it if he does something, but he just stands there, staring. Mind you, he's not checking his car or anything either. I try to stay calm and just pray that another car will come along soon. This goes on for what seems like forever, but was probably 15 plus minutes. He's just casually leaning against his car, just looking at us. Eventually we see car lights in our rear view, and then the guy jogs to his door and gets back in his car. He speeds off, going dangerously fast. So there was obviously nothing wrong with his car. I start driving, not wanting to cause a wreck. We don't see anything else for a while, but we pass the same car parked along the highway a while later, and it pulls back on and starts tailing us again. I try to speed up and get rid of him, but he just keeps following us. We have cell service at this point, but I don't know if we should call the cops because, well, nothing really happens. I call home and I tell my brothers what's going on and tell them to wait on the porch for us. And the car follows me all the way home, down the really long drive to my house as well. I get to my house and my two brothers are waiting on the porch holding their deer rifles. I pull in and the car just goes to the end of the drive, loops around, and speeds off back the way it came. We tried to catch its plates, but we just couldn't make them out in the dark like that. Needless to say, me and my friend were really freaked out, but when I told other friends the whole story, they just didn't think it was a big deal. What do you guys think happened that night? This happened a few years ago when I was maybe 15 or 16. I used to not have blinds or curtains on my windows, and I never bothered to get something to cover them up for a long time. My street is fairly rural, and we know all of our neighbours fairly well, so I was never really worried about something weird happening. That is, until this night. It was sometime in the winter. I've always been a bit of a night owl, so I was up late on my computer. I had the light in my room on, but it was pitch black outside, so I couldn't see anything at the window. It was completely silent in my house when I heard it. 3 loud bangs on my window. It scared me so bad that I fell off my bed and I stayed down there for a while. Eventually, I convinced myself that it must have been some kind of an animal, like a bat or something, that just flew into my window. I calmed myself down and I went back to whatever the hell I was doing, and I didn't really think much of it after that. I just never bothered to mention it to anyone, until a few nights later around the same time. I had my window cracked open, still with no blinds covering it, when I heard leaves crunching outside like somebody was walking on them. They stopped right outside of my window, but it was still too dark for me to see what was out there. At this point, I probably should have screamed for my parents or called the police or something, because I could just feel someone just staring directly at me, and I could feel that they had bad intentions. I was too scared to even move, but I just knew somehow that there was someone out there. So I did the only thing that I could think of at the time. I stared directly into the pitch blackness outside of the window, put on the most intimidating face that I could manage, and stayed like that. I must have sat in that position for a good 5 minutes until I heard the footsteps again, this time leading away from my window. I shut the window and tacked a blanket around it after I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, and I barely slept that night. The next day I bought a pair of blinds and told my mum about the incident when we were at the store. I said to her that I heard footsteps outside my window last night. My mum doesn't get scared or intimidated easily, She's one of the most fearless people I know, in fact. But as soon as those words left my mouth, she just turned white. She said, "Did you tell your dad about that?" And I told her no, I hadn't told my dad, and asked why she wanted to know. She looked me straight in the eyes and told me just one of the most bone-chilling things that I've ever heard. "Honey, your dad was talking to our neighbor this morning. She told him that she had seen a man walking around our yard for the past few nights. And last night she saw him walking towards your window, but he disappeared into the dark before she could figure out if it was one of us or not. She said after a few minutes that he left apparently, but he came back a few hours later and she saw him while getting ready for work. She knew then that it wasn't one of us this time since the sun was coming up, and he also had a knife in his hand. She went outside and screamed for him to leave, but instead of running down the street, he ran into our backyard and then into the woods. I live in a military neighborhood, and all of my neighbors are active duty, which tends to make me feel pretty safe if something were to happen, but after I just heard that there was a creepy man outside my window in the woods more than once, and that he ran into our backyard instead of down the street, I don't think any amount of military would make me feel safe after that. My parents never let me stay over at my boyfriend's house back then, but after that night, she let me stay at my boyfriend's house for almost a week. And when I got back home, my blinds were installed and there was a curtain over the window, and the window lock that was previously broken was now fixed. I haven't unlocked or opened that window since this happened, and we never saw or heard about this guy again. My neighbor never saw anything again, and we just reported the incident, but never heard anything about it after that. I don't know who he was or what he looked like, but I sure hope that he doesn't come back. I live on an island where most people live near the coast, but my childhood house was deep in the mountains. Imagine a house in the woods, but at the very top of a mountain if you can. The house is surrounded by thick mist every night, like in the bad horror movies, and the woods around it start less than 2 feet from the outer walls of the house. Our closest neighbor is a 15-minute drive away, and 5 minutes away there's also an abandoned house. I think the house belonged to a distant relative or something, but was abandoned more than 40 years ago. There's no streetlights, and there's all kinds of animals roaming the area. This is important to the story because even though you couldn't see a group of 10 people hiding like 1 meter away from you in the woods, you could hear absolutely everything right up to a couple of kilometers away, in fact. If we saw car lights or heard a car approaching, me and my family would turn off the lights and we would hide. I don't know why, we were just shy and antisocial, you name it. But anyway, I think that's enough to set the story up. I'll add some details along the way that may be important. But my house is small and impoverished, and our family car was a good one. I don't really know much about cars, but my dad always said that without a really good car, we wouldn't be able to go up and down the mountain that we lived in. Also, there's currently 8 people inside of our house around 11 p.m. So, I'm at the dining table just enjoying some cereal while I'm watching some anime. Basically just kind of having the time of my life. The lights to the house were on, so nothing could be seen in the dark outside. There's a window in front of me that gives sight to the front of the entrance of the house and onto the road. And just then, something calls my attention, but I don't hear or see anything. I think that I see a human silhouette outside, but it doesn't move, so I just ignore it as some effect of the lights in the house and my own reflection or something. More anime, more cereal, and I feel something move at the other side of the window, and this time, the silhouette is waving at me. I felt my heart jump out of my chest, and I froze. The person outside waves at me as if trying to make sure that nobody else in the house is noticing him. After maybe 10 seconds, in which I'm just looking at him with a spoon halfway to my mouth, he decides to say hello. He then says, "I need help." My parents hear this and they approach the window, which made me sure that I wasn't just looking at a ghost, which was amazing news for me. But the man outside starts telling a story about how he got his car stolen at gunpoint and needs help. My parents are surprised that nobody heard his footsteps or a car or anything, so they whisper their theories amongst themselves. For this mysterious guy's story to be true, he had to be mugged more than a mile away, get his car stolen, and then walk for half an hour in the dark through the woods, following the dim light of our house. It may sound crazy, but my parents decided to actually believe him, and they offer calling the police. But our visitor begs and says the stupidest thing that he could have. He says, "Don't call the police, I don't have a gun." My parents stay silent for a while. The guy outside knows that he's messed up, but proceeds to make his request. He asks, "Can I get a ride downtown?" My dad nervously chuckles and gives him some sort of an excuse. He mentions the time, the fact that he felt the guy was lying and that he had already called the police, which was a lie in fact. And this is when my favorite part of the story begins. I stand up from the table, shaking. I go to a closet, and even though I can't see the guy's face, I know that he's following my actions. I get 2 machetes that are half my size and run to another room. I was terrified, and looking back, I probably took away the only weapons my parents could have used to protect themselves in case of an altercation. But I opened the door to my room where me and my siblings sleep, and they were watching some silly show, probably something stupid like Hannah Montana or iCarly, and their hyena laughter came out. My sisters are really loud, and my younger brothers are 4 years old, 7 years old, and 9 years old, so their laughs are angelical by day and demonic by night. But I signal at them to shut the hell up, and they do so, joining me and my parents in our fear. We sit there in silence as the guy says, "It's okay. If you can't help me, I'll just go to the next house, alright?" My dad says, "There is no next house. You should wait for the police here." "I don't need the police. I'm good." This goes back and forth. The guy is now in good shape apparently to walk an hour down the mountain to reach downtown. My dad offers a rusty metal tricycle from our porch so that he can go downtown as a bit of a joke. And the guy accepts this offer and grabs the tricycle. I assume that he just wanted to leave with something. But this tricycle is like 20 years old and it definitely doesn't work now. We hear the screeching of the tricycle for a couple of seconds as the stranger just struggled to be able to ride it, and then it stopped not too far away from our house. At least, it seemed like he stopped, and we didn't hear any footsteps that indicated the guy had left. And after trying to identify if he was still in sight to no avail, my dad finally calls the police. We wait in silence, looking at the road from the front windows. 15 minutes later, the police get there, which was an amazing time back home, heroic even. And as soon as the red and blue lights show up, they illuminate the entire road up to the abandoned house. The tricycle is still on the road not too far away. The police claim not seeing anybody on the road. There's only one road into the mountain, and if the guy kept on walking, they definitely would have seen him. So they take a look in the woods with a flashlight, and after that, they just called it a day. The cops were clearly freaked out by the eerie look of the house, though, and they didn't stay for more than 5 minutes. Luckily, nothing else happened that night, and I slept with 2 machetes under my pillow, which I remember angered one of my sisters. But to this day, we have no idea who the person was. There were no carjackings reported the next day, and even though a lot of weird things happened around my house, we never saw this guy again. It's pretty obvious he was trying to steal our family's car, but there were a few things that we could just never understand. Like, where the hell did he come from? Where the hell did he go as well? If his story was true, he had the worst luck in the world, I suppose. I think the situation was interesting, though, because I often think about his point of view and how Horror Night turns a bit, well, comical. I mean, imagine this. You go to rob a house, it turns out the people inside speak calmly. I don't know how much criminals encounter this as they try to intimidate or deceive. There's a scrawny, seemingly mute kid that tries to be sneaky and grabbing some machetes and then hide in the darkness in the house. And then there's child's laughter coming from non-visible rooms from the house. He could see the doors, but the inside of the rooms would be geometrically impossible to look into from the windows. And in the end, I think that we were lucky to kind of out-creep the creep that night. Because I just don't see any other reason for the guy to back out from his plans. The guy clearly had a gun and bad intentions, not to mention his ability to ninja walk through a forest where we even heard wild cats walking around. And also, no neighbors to witness or hear anything. Prior to 2016, I lived in Palmdale, California. My sister Honey and my youngest daughter lived with my mother in a rented townhouse apartment in Oxford, about 2 hours away. Every week or two, I made the long drive to take them shopping and clean their house because they were both disabled. My mother was my heart and my sweet sister helped raise me, so anything they needed, I was always there for them. On the first floor, the kitchen was in the back with a door that opened to the backyard.